Chapter 115. You can't escape. Jack's hoarse voice was like the low cry of a deep-sea monster. It penetrated through the walls, shaking Luo Nan's soul body to the point of being slightly shaken. Was this guy really a burner? Based on the information that Luo Nan knew, burners were not like this. At the very least, the burners under Yen Hong's archetype formatting theory were not like this. Otherwise, there would be no need for the deep blue platform or the exoskeleton armor. He could just modify his entire body. However, what Jack had displayed was indeed the power of the format of fire. In the next second, the thick and heavy walls of the training room rumbled and violently deformed. A hole had been blasted open in the center, and cracks spread out like a spider web. Jack's training room was located in the middle of the 141st floor. It was a space sealed off by 4 thick and heavy soundproof walls. Only one side had an open door. The direction Luo Nan chose to jump in was the opposite of the main door. He stretched out the normal path of pursuit to the greatest extent. However, Jack's choice was completely different from a normal person's. Using Jack as a reference, Luo Nan was actually really affected by the human mindset. He should have gone up or down just now. There was a floor separating them. Even if there was interference from the magnetic field, the situation would be completely different. Luo Nan didn't have the mind to reflect on his actions. He still tried to pull away, but the pressure his soul body endured continued to rise, making it difficult for him to move forward. Hell, even the military's burners, with the support of their exoskeleton armor, didn't have this kind of power. The wall exploded with a bang following another heavy strike. Jack walked out with large strides. His naked eye and bionic eye locked firmly onto Luo Nan's position. At this moment, the scene of flames soaring around his body had already disappeared, but the magnetic field that was like the deep sea was even more powerful. Through soul observation, he could confirm that Jack's entire body was deeply integrated with the deep sea EM field. The energy circulating within his body endlessly increased the effectiveness of the magnetic field, and the exertion of strength with every movement could bring about an intense change in the magnetic field. This was undoubtedly a terrible experience for Luo Nan. Jack stared at the direction where the soul was. His rage seemed to have been controlled, and his voice became hoarse and deep. "Young man, do you know how great of a price I paid in order to obtain the Deep Sea Type 4 Dynamo Core? Do you know how much your naughty behavior will cost me?" Dynamo Core? Is that the official name for the external neuron? Also, does this model also represent the corresponding ability? Just like the deep sea EM field that Jack was radiating. Luo Nan unconsciously pondered over this word, and Jack didn't immediately attack him. Instead, he sized up the surroundings with a somewhat uncertain appearance. Ability users nowadays are really amazing. I actually saw a young man who can raise a Darksider life form. Moreover, that breed seems to be quite interesting. Jack should be probing. Though he had injured the human-faced arachnid, he was still unable to capture its whereabouts. Luo Nan responded with silence. His attitude made Jack laugh coldly. "Alright, I'll add this incident to my database and tell it to people who are willing to listen to my story. As for you, I have no desire to communicate at all." The exact same words were returned to him by Jack. If it was in the past, Luo Nan would have felt that Jack's words were sharp. But right now he couldn't help but think, was this Jack's free will, or was it the result of an artificial intelligence's calculations? This riddle would not be solved in a short amount of time. Luo Nan deeply felt Jack's murderous intent. He didn't hesitate any longer. He concentrated all of his energy and fled regardless of everything. This time, he learned from his previous lesson and directly fled to the bottom of the floor. Though the distance was even more pitiful than last time. Less than 4 meters. The floor was constructed from a combination of concrete and high-strength light alloy. It was much tougher than the wall material that Jack had smashed apart. Jack's attack smashed down, and the floor instantly caved in, but it didn't immediately collapse. Luo Nan took advantage of this opportunity to dive down another floor. The straight-line distance between him and Jack had already increased to over 30 meters. The binding power of the deep sea EM field suddenly weakened. Luo Nan's heart was filled with joy. He was about to forcefully leap through space once more. This time, His target was the night sky outside of the Dashang building. As long as he reached the void where there was nothing to rely on, Jack wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Then a muffled bang rang out and the bullet, which possessed powerful kinetic energy, instantly pierced through 2 floors of the floor. Even though the bullet deviated a bit in the process of piercing through, it still exploded near Luo Nan's soul body. The churning cloud of fire had the effect of a magnetic field, giving his soul body enormous interference. Luo Nan had seen similar special ammunition on the warship before, but the effect of this round was clearly stronger. And the ammunition wasn't just one round. It was a continuous barrage of bullets. All of them passed through the hole that had just been pierced through, exploding in succession. For a time, the cloud of fire pervaded the air, igniting a few flammable items on the floor. The 2 floors of the floor were forcibly smashed through in this one delay. Jack flew down just like that. The powerful deep-sea EM field had already enveloped Luo Nan before he even arrived. It was as if Luo Nan's soul body had been thrown into the deep sea once more. It suddenly became sluggish and difficult to move. And this time, the temperature at the bottom of the sea rose crazily. It was like a volcano erupting in the sea, wanting to cook him thoroughly. Luo Nan suddenly felt a sense of weakness as he sank into it. It came from nothing, and it gradually became clear. It wasn't that Jack's format of fire, or the deep-sea EM field caused great harm to his soul body. Instead, the human-faced arachnid, who acted as an external fuel tank, had received heavy damage from the first wave of attacks. It had yet to recover. Luo Nan hadn't truly reached the standard of an out-of-body state. He was able to roam freely in the form of a soul body. To a large extent, he had to rely on the energy provided by the human-faced arachnid. Jack's format of fire exploded, inadvertently striking Luo Nan's vital point. This wasn't good. And at this time, Jack's grand action of tearing down walls and setting them on fire finally triggered a response from the building's defense system. Right now, the floor the 2 were on was the office area of a certain large company. It was the weekend, so there wasn't a single person inside. The first to respond was the building's automatic mechanical security system. The door to the office area rumbled open, following the simultaneous activation of the fire alarm and burglary alarm lights. A civilian defense robot drove into the room. The barrel of its anti-riot gun was aimed at the only visible target, Jack. The problem was that the anti-riot gun hadn't even fired when the robot received a brand new command. It entered a docile standby state. Then the fire alarm and the burglary alarm all stopped. The building recovered its silence. Only the office items that had been set ablaze within the flames were left to burn. Jack didn't even turn his head during this entire process. He just stared dead at the location of Luo Nan's soul body. Chapter 116. Ronan had witnessed the entire process of Jack controlling the situation. It was as if Jack was holding a remote control for action and stop. With just a press, the security system of the entire floor, or even the entire building, froze. This scene absolutely wasn't the result of Jack's high level of authority in the Dashang building. This was because the robot didn't have any procedures to test his authority. It directly ceased all activities, and didn't have any power to resist. This made Luo Nan think of Crag Burst's pitiful jeep. Luo Nan finally broke his silence. He used psychic waves to transmit. How did you do it? Oh, another exchange? Jack sneered. Why are you making a fuss? You can control. Oh, and Darksider life forms. I can control machinery. That's fair. Jack didn't refuse to communicate, but he didn't respond directly either. He didn't mind dealing with Luo Nan a bit more. After all, he couldn't find any traces of the Darksider life form from beginning to end. This caused him to brood over it. He needed time to adjust the relevant parameters of the database and unceasingly revise the range of his detection. Luo Nan could more or less guess what Jack was doing. After all, many of Jack's detection methods required the use of that electronic eye, so Jack was constantly turning his head. This was good news. It seemed that Jack was very afraid of the Darksider life form. Perhaps there was still a threat to the current him? Luo Nan secretly paid attention to this. But right now a large portion of his mind couldn't help drifting in the direction of controlling machinery. Jack and Yin Yongbua's previous actions reminded him of another similar example. Gear's underground laboratory. To put it more bluntly, the external neuron. Luonan could confirm that the thread in Jack's brain was indeed the external neuron. It was also the dynamo core that Luonan spoke of. It was this product that seemed to surpass the technology of Earth, that allowed it to bypass all authority and directly control all information devices, manipulating them at will. And now, new facts told him that other than the aforementioned functions, this thing was also the key to the burner and format of fire. Such a strange creation had actually accompanied him for 5 years, and it was mailed to him by that coward. What did that mean? What did that mean? It was hard for Luonan to divert his attention to ponder over this matter during the violent storm of pursuit and escape. Now that he had the slightest bit of time, the relevant thoughts were like heart-devouring bugs, gnawing and grinding in his heart. External neuron, dynamo core, burners, gang leader, Yin Yongbua, quantum corporation, and that coward. Luonan's mind was practically tied into a dead knot by the sudden clues and bursts of information. If he didn't loosen up a bit, then his soul would suffocate. Luonan suddenly felt very regretful. Perhaps he really should have listened to Jack's 2 more stories. No matter what, he wanted to know what kind of connection there was between Jack, the mafia leader, and that coward. Right now Luonan had to work hard for this goal. He did his best to maintain a clear line of thought. He used psychic waves to transmit information as slowly as possible to probe Jack's reaction. Controlling machines at will? You don't have that ability. Otherwise, you wouldn't be hiding in the recycle stratum as a mafia boss. Instead, you'd be running out to do whatever you want. Jack laughed hoarsely. Are you trying to provoke me? Kid, you've already succeeded before, so you don't have to worry about how you die. I admit that you have the ability to kill me. After all, you are already a burner. What did I say something wrong? Luonan saw Jack grin from the corner of his mouth. The sarcasm within was thick. Jack shrugged his shoulders. It's nothing. People always have the right to be ignorant. I don't have the obligation to correct them. Kid, there's no need to probe anymore. Call your pet. I'll give you a more satisfying death. Luonan would be stupid to listen to Jack's words. But Jack's sarcastic smile and tone were quite interesting. It was a kind of aloof superiority. The people he spoke of didn't seem to be specifically referring to Luonan. Instead, it was an unbridled map cannon. It was brimming with the flavor of everyone in the world is drunk, but I am the only sober one. Luonan remembered that a considerable portion of Jack's high-level mental activity originated from the data template of the nucleus. In a certain sense, Jack was more real than any normal person. Then where did this sense of superiority come from? Luonan sized up Jack once more. The information he obtained from the mafia members showed that this savage and cruel fellow had become the mafia leader of this region in just a span of 2 to 3 years. He started off as a fighting instructor. He used the bloody 70% elimination rule to rapidly become an important figure in the fighting arena. Then he became a referee, a host, a partner, and finally became the chief spokesperson of the fighting arena's mafia power. His abilities overflowed as a mafia leader, but this didn't mean that he was the same in other areas. Then, it's the metal beetle, right? Luonan suddenly spoke up and went straight to the point. Jack was a bit startled. Then he laughed. Are you still going to be angry, young man? Luonan ignored Jack's interference. His thoughts were so certain that everything that happened within Jack's body was exposed to the prying eyes of the human-faced arachnid. Yin Yongbua used it to control our jeep, and then you came over to deal with it. But you're clearly more interested in the metal beetle itself. Oh, the metal beetle is too unprofessional. You call it the dynamo core? The deep sea type 4 dynamo core. It's a mystical device that allows ordinary altered humans to possess abilities similar to a burner. Jack was silent for a moment. The dark red electronic eyes that had been searching for the human-faced arachnid turned back to stare at the blurry figure of Luonan's soul body. You're trying to display your own intelligence? But we don't recruit new people here. The intensity of the deep CEM field continued to increase as Jack spoke. Luonan's soul body felt even worse. From Luonan's perspective, The most important thing to do right now was to break free from Jack's control, as quickly as possible, and flee far away. However, the spiritual light gushing out from his mind interweaved into sections of thought. Under the pressure of the outside world, he pieced them together and advanced layer by layer. He was unwilling to interrupt this process. The dynamo core is very precious to you, so Yin Yongbo will use it to pay you. But looking at the model number, this should be a product that has already been put into production. At the very least, it's a trial production series of products. The only ones who possess this kind of manufacturing ability and are closely related to the burner are Quantum Corporation and their related powers. Luonan's brain power operated. It had certainly reached the pinnacle of his 15 years of life. He didn't directly converse with Jack. Instead, he endlessly tossed out a few bait in his words. At the same time, he earnestly observed all of Jack's reactions, using them to revise his own inferences. Of course, there's also you. You're an altered human, but you don't come from the military. You just happen to be so adaptable to the burner's abilities. The number of people in this world who can do this can be counted on one hand. So I believe that you also come from Quantum Corporation, and that you've always worked for the apex technology company of this earth. Luonan saw Jack's face reveal a mocking smile of superiority, just as the psychic wave message was transmitted. Chapter 117. Seeing Jack's expression, Luonan seemed to be able to hear his main body's heart skip a beat. He had deliberately added the modifier phrase, Earth's top technology company, in order to probe into Jack's relationship with Quantum Corporation. He had thought of many reactions beforehand, but he never imagined that Jack would bring this smile over. Even the curve of Jack's mouth was exactly the same. Luonan admitted that he had to reconsider Jack's relationship with Quantum Corporation. But before that, there was one thing he needed to make clear. Why? Why would a gang leader holed up in the recycling stratum use this sort of attitude to point at a power that was ranked in the top 3 in terms of market value in the world? Using the simplest of straight-line logic to consider things, wouldn't that mean that behind Jack's back, at least in his consciousness, there was a colossus that could look down upon Quantum Corporation, the Earth's apex tech company, with eyes of contempt? Luonan once again thought of the hooks buried within Jack's words. Soul configurations, deep blue world. These were terms he had never heard of before. Now that he thought about it, it was extremely likely that they hid a world-shocking secret. Is that coward related to these things? How deep was the connection? Thoughts spun in his mind, but time didn't allow Luonan to think too much. He could only continue his previous train of thought and make some slight adjustments to probe Jack's background. You're both employees of Quantum Corporation, but Yin Yongbua can control the Rainbow Fund. You can only hang around in a gang. He can casually toss out a dynamo core, and you'll fight to the death for it. From what I know, Yin Yongbua hasn't been a part of Quantum Corporation for long. Is it because of his strength that he was able to quickly climb to a high position? Or is it because of his father? Or perhaps, as an altered human who needs the help of a dynamo core to possess the abilities of a burner is destined to be a defective product from the production line. You're too damn smart. Another humming sound rang out from within the low and hoarse roar. The pressure and heat of the deep CEM field rapidly rose. Under the sudden increase in pressure, Luonan's soul body was forcibly compressed. Clearly Luonan's words had stabbed Jack's sore spot. The smile on Jack's face completely disappeared. He reached out with his hand and pressed it against his forehead. It was as if he was concealing his momentary loss of self-control. But the electronic eye that was already on the verge of burning exposed his current mood. Fury template. Highest level. Right now Luonan was already straining to even transmit psychic waves. However, he was even more clear that if he were to really give up like this, Jack would very likely immediately make a move to finish him off. He needed a little more time. Did I misspeak? I'm really sorry. I'm just saying my guesses. Some of them might sound stupid, but I think our current situation is even more stupid. That's right. The speaker is stupid, and the listener isn't smart either. Jack panted heavily. The last time he reacted like this was when the power went out. But this was really effective. His emotions began to recover, and he was even mocking himself. This level of control seemed to be something only a modified person, who could switch their template, at any time could achieve. Ronan noticed Jack's restraint. It was reasonable to say that this callous altered human had many opportunities. He could erupt with a powerful format of fire, and turn Luonan's soul body into ashes. But he never truly made a move other than that first strike. Compared to the ruthlessness and decisiveness he displayed before, the current Jack was a little too hesitant. This had nothing to do with intelligence or stupidity. It could only be considered from a more realistic level. Was it fear of the Darksider life forms? Or was it because of a more direct, more fatal reason? Jack clearly wouldn't reveal the answer. And he also made substantial movements. He began to walk forward, closing the distance between him and Luonan's soul body. As the distance shrunk, the pressure of the magnetic field increased exponentially. Luonan tried to retreat, but the results were minimal. Jack revealed a smile once more. I've heard back in the deep blue world that it's possible to use the powerful magnetic field of the dynamo core to confine and capture souls, and even Darksider life forms. Right now I can give it a try. The deep blue world? Luonan's first thought was actually the information that came from far beyond the heavens. He only truly reacted in the next moment. Jack actually wanted to capture him alive? Yes, looking at the increasing pressure of the magnetic field, Jack really did have this kind of plan. Compared to the beginning, Luonan's soul body had already shrunk by more than 2 times. If this continued, he would probably become the legendary 1-inch mage, someone who could be needed by anyone. Luonan was already unable to think of anything else. He concentrated all of his energy, wanting to make his soul body move once more. But at this time, the only thing that could move his entire body was the heavily chained crow, which had been circulating without end from beginning to end. Chains. Luonan's thoughts were still unclear when the vibrating amplitude of the heavily chained crow suddenly increased. But this wasn't an internal force. It was an external impact. A sharp hissing sound rang out. A phantom pounced out from the floor below, forcibly colliding into the deep CEM field. The impact force on the mental plane actually caused the magnetic field's operation to suddenly stagnate. Luonan's soul body was struck by this phantom in the next moment. The phantom tightened, and then loosened. Then Luonan flew backwards like he was riding on a cloud, escaping from the range of the deep CEM field's control. The human-faced arachnid. This malevolent monster had killed its way out when it was needed the most. Its body still carried the vapors of turbid currents of emotions. The heavy injuries from the format of fire could no longer be seen, at least on the surface. Success! Luonan's mind relaxed. He flipped over and stood on the back of the human-faced arachnid. He urged this monster, which had just drunk a blood potion, to fly towards the nearest outer wall of the building without turning his head. Jack's heavy and swift footsteps rang out behind him. He was still in pursuit, his speed rapidly increasing, and the large cubicle layout of this floor's office gave him ample space to accelerate. The deep CEM field followed Jack's pursuit, moving like a shadow behind Luonan and the human-faced arachnid. It was like a silent evil beast, staring fixedly at its prey, wanting to devour it as soon as possible. But in the end it was useless. A distance of several dozen meters was far too short for a soul body. Luonan and the human-faced arachnid directly smashed through the outer wall of the building in the time of a single breath. They flashed again in the interweaving neon lights of the night sky, flying 1,000 meters into the air. Jack charged to the end of the building. His momentum hadn't dissipated yet, so he heavily smashed into the French window. The tempered glass, which was of considerable strength and toughness, exploded with spiderweb cracks in an instant. Unexpectedly, it didn't shatter, but the lightweight alloy that held the 4 sides in place was unable to withstand the impact. The entire French window was peeled off from the wall by Jack, falling rapidly to the ground. Jack used the momentum to dissipate his momentum. He stood at the edge of the empty building and pulled out a thick-barreled handgun. It should be the one that had shot out the military's special ammunition. The muzzle of the gun was aimed at the night sky, but in the end, Jack didn't fire in vain. He just stared coldly at the empty shadow in the night sky. Only after a long while did he turn around and leave. Chapter 118. Leave? Aren't you taking things too easy? Luonan stood in the night sky. He watched Jack hatefully leave through the crisscrossing light rail outside of the Deshang building. He let out a long sigh in his heart, and laughed in spite of himself. There was a very interesting relationship between Luonan and Jack right now. Jack's deep CEM field possessed the ability to instantly heavily injure, or even kill Luonan. But its effective range was limited. Luonan himself didn't have any methods to threaten Jack. But he had an extremely long range of perception, with a radius of 500 meters. This meant that when Luonan pulled apart the distance between him and Jack, it would be nearly impossible for Jack to escape Luonan's tracking and locking onto him. Luonan cut a sorry figure within the deep CEM field. Now Jack's movements would be just as distressed. Each and every one of Jack's movements would be exposed to Luonan's clairvoyance. Luonan patted the human-faced arachnid lightly, indicating for it to follow. The human-faced arachnid suddenly flew into the air. It swiftly plunged down from the night sky, and crashed into the Deshang building once more. It passed through the wall as if it was nothing. The turbid smoke curled around its body, making it look demonic and bizarre. Luonan's mental senses locked onto Jack, who was over 20 floors away, a distance of 100 meters, centimeter precision and several dozen floors. It was safe and meticulous at the same time, and Luonan could react in time. Jack was certainly able to sense Luonan's monitoring and locking onto him. He turned his head repeatedly along the way, accurately locking onto the direction of Luonan's soul body every time. But so what? He still couldn't do anything to Luonan. Luonan was much more relaxed this time. He stared at Jack's whereabouts as he sorted out the situation with the human-faced arachnid. Right now Luonan's soul body was standing on the back of the human-faced arachnid. The sensation on the mental plane was very strange. Even though his nervous system was able to restore the sensation to the greatest degree, there were still some things that were impossible to translate. He could only understand them. Luonan came into contact with the human-faced arachnid. It was like he was standing on top of a cloud covered in burrs. There was nothing below him, but there was the scorching internal pressure and external tension acting at the same time, propping up the sensation on the mental plane. The so-called internal pressure and tension was just a rough feeling. The human-faced arachnid's foundation structure was actually hidden within. The current precision of Luonan's senses wasn't enough to pry into the mysteries within, but he could roughly sense that the foundation structure of the human-faced arachnid was actually a bit loose. The human-faced arachnid had collided head-on with Jack's format of fire, when the human-faced arachnid had suffered heavy injuries. Most of its devil body had been melted away by the format of fire. Less than half of its body remained. But from the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, this sort of injury was serious but not fatal. It could consume a spiritual seed, or its own kind to achieve rapid recovery, and even increase in power. But Luonan instinctively rejected the first evil method. As for the second method, where would he find other human-faced arachnid clones in such a short time? Even if they found it, it was hard to say who would swallow who. Therefore, Luonan could only choose the stupidest path for him. Go drink water from the turbid flow of emotions. Drink until you're full. It didn't matter if the human-faced arachnid was happy or not. This was the only way for the human-faced arachnid to recover as soon as possible. Fortunately, the underground fighting arena at the bottom of the Deshang building was a dirty reservoir of negative emotions. Luonan gave the human-faced arachnid a death order. He would eat wherever he went, but he had to avoid Rue 1 and Crag Burst. In a certain sense, his conversation with Jack was tantamount to buying time for the human-faced arachnid. Right now, Luonan's plan could be considered a success. The human-faced arachnid had recovered a bit of its vitality, saving Luonan from the most fatal danger. But from another perspective, the consequences of forcing the human-faced arachnid to drink dirty water were extremely serious. Even though the human-faced arachnid had suffered heavy injuries from the format of fire, its foundation was still quite solid. It was just weak due to excessive consumption. Now this fellow appeared to have an imposing aura, but its foundation was quite unstable. It had dropped by more than one level from its peak, and it wasn't easy to make up for it. Luonan knew from this that the grade of food was extremely important to the human-faced arachnid. It absolutely could not touch the return grass, unless it was absolutely necessary. Speaking of which, were the people in the fighting arena still alive? Cragburst's voice came over just as this thought flashed through his mind. Hello. Scout, did you get disconnected? Nope. From beginning to end, Luonan hadn't informed Cragburst that he had come alone to find Jack. On one hand, he didn't want to expose the existence of his soul body. On the other hand, he felt that Rue 1, who was in the fighting arena, needed Cragburst's attention. He had considered everything thoroughly, but he never thought that he would be faced with such a dangerous situation. It was reasonable to say that with the existence of the Hexa-ear, the communication between the two should have been unobstructed. The two had even spoken to each other before facing off against Jack head-on. But Cragburst didn't make a sound for a period of time. Now that Luonan thought about it, he found it very strange. Luonan thought about that dangerous situation. Perhaps Jack's deep CEM field had an interference effect. I saw that your crow was smacking its lips. I thought that your spirit attachment time was up. Nope. Wait a moment. Luonan controlled the human-faced arachnid to switch to a large angle. He arrived at the middle floor of the Dashang building. He could completely display the advantage of his sensing range here, encompassing the entire Dashang building. The situation of the underground fighting arena entered into Luonan's control in an instant. However, paying attention to both sides at the same time was quite a challenge to his energy and observation precision. The situation of the underground fighting arena was somewhat outside of Luonan's expectations. Mr. Ma's little darling hadn't been transported over yet. There was only Rue 1 by herself on the fighting arena, but the faces of the several hundred tycoons in the spectator stands were all glowing with health. They were full of energy, and they were even more excited. They chatted loudly with their gambling opponents, provoked them, and endlessly increased the stakes. Or they teased the accompanying beauties, handsome men, and even the sexual services provided by the fighting arena. Some simply acted on the spot, and did preposterous things under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Of course, this could also become a part of the gambling game. Had they really just been swept clean by the human-faced arachnid? They're all crazy. As an ability user, Cragburst had seen many preposterous and depraved scenes in his many years of adventuring. But the current situation could be counted on one hand. This is simply some secret order's carnival ceremony. They use all methods to please the demon god. Hey, do you think that there's really an order behind them? I don't know. Though Luonan said this with his mouth, he was reminded by Cragburst to pour a bit more energy into the ugly tycoons over there. Oh, this kind of emotion. What a big empty fire. Chapter 119. The human-faced arachnid was a first-rate looter and arsonist. Luonan was certain that the human-faced arachnid had just swept through this place wantonly. It was not an exaggeration to say that it had sucked the marrow from the bones. But during this process, the human-faced arachnid displayed its outstanding looting techniques. It swallowed the negative emotions and the corresponding energy and vitality. It hollowed out the foundations of the vast majority of people here, leaving behind some floating soil and leaves. Then it lit a fire to its heart's content. The negative emotions that went out of control were the spark. The floating energy and vitality were the fuel to ignite the fire. There were many examples like this in reality. The weaker the body, the more uncontrollable the desire. The moment one lost control, the last bit of vitality within one's body would be completely squeezed out and burned away. Right now, the rich people in the stands, including their attendants and secretaries, and the large amount of related staff members of the fighting arena, had sunk into this situation. They were completely unaware of it. When Luonan saw through the crux of this, the situation of the fighting arena became completely different in his eyes. This wasn't a fighting arena at all. It was clearly a brazier that was about to burn dry. Or perhaps it was a deep mine that was filled with gas. It was the kind that had already been ignited. The enormous amount of negative emotions, and the floating energy and vitality, formed a cloud of fire that was hard to see with the naked eye. It diffused out on the mental plane. If these people could sense their own souls, they would discover that the most terrifying feeling of suffocation had already descended upon their heads. Only an awakened like Cragburst could feel the intense feeling of disharmony within. He felt an enormous rejection towards this environment. Why did it create this environment? Luonan was disinclined to think too much about the final fate of the rich people in the stands. Instead, he was quite curious about the human-faced arachnid's way of doing things. In any case, Jack wasn't doing anything special right now. Luonan patted the human-faced arachnid beneath him, indicating for it to give him a demonstration. Of course the human-faced arachnid wouldn't refuse. It immediately flashed a few times and charged back into the fighting arena. Then it hid its demonic body deep within the cloud of fire. Its 6 heterochromatic demon eyes were half squinted and half opened. Its malevolent mouth opened wide and sucked in the cloud of fire. It then spat out the unstable muddy flow of emotions from within its body, forming a stable exchange. Luonan completely understood. The human-faced arachnid couldn't disobey Luonan's orders, so it created an environment to kill poison for itself. It did its utmost to remove the components within the turbid flow of emotions that it was unwilling to absorb. Even though he didn't know how much the human-faced arachnid would improve after this, it was fine as long as the human-faced arachnid was happy. In essence, the fighting arena was no longer a place where the rich and powerful could seek excitement and wantonly seek pleasure. Instead, it was an enormous altar. All the rulers, who believed themselves to be infallible, had become livestock placed on the altar. They were slaughtered, as the human-faced arachnid desired. Though this didn't really conform to Luonan's aesthetics, he didn't feel the need to fix it. Glancing at Jack again, he saw that the fellow had slowed down and seemed to be thinking about something. Luonan didn't need the human-faced arachnid by his side at all times to track him, and the previous combat proved that it would be easier for Luonan to adapt if he and the human-faced arachnid were separated. Luonan let the human-faced arachnid stay in the fighting arena for the time being. It would be good to stabilize its unstable foundation a bit. However, less than 10 seconds after he made this decision, an unforeseen event occurred. Rue 1, who had been standing on the stage with her hands by her side, suddenly raised her head, her gaze pointing towards the void above her head. That place was originally the position of the broadcast screen. Her image was displayed on the screen. Many people noticed this change, and soon they gave a reasonable explanation. Oh, the flat-chested witch is starting to get sentimental. Is she going to see her final whole image? Look, there won't be another chance in the future. A commotion that wasn't too big, nor too small set off in the fighting arena. The exceptionally excited spectators cast their filthy and mocking words together, with their irrepressible emotions towards the fighting stage. Ruewen didn't react to these stimulations at all. She just looked up in a daze. Was she looking at her own image? It wasn't like this. Luonan was certain that Ruewen's gaze seemed to be directed towards the broadcast screen. But in reality, the focus wasn't there at all. Instead, it was directed towards the human-faced arachnid. This was because the human-faced arachnid's 6 heterochromatic demon eyes suddenly opened in that instant, and they pointed towards Ruewen's position. The demonic body that had been idle within the flaming cloud suddenly tightened. Burning negative emotions and vital energy curled around its body, forming faintly discernible rings of fire. Luonan's command came in at this time. He was worried that the human-faced arachnid would actually take a bite out of Ruewen, the spiritual seed that it had coveted for a long time. He wanted the human-faced arachnid to retract its position. The human-faced arachnid did as it was told, but Ruewen's line of sight unexpectedly followed and moved without the slightest deviation. At this time, Cragburst felt that something was wrong. Hey, what is she looking at? I don't know. Luonan's scalp went numb when he said this. If this scene was not an illusion, then Ruewen seemed to be able to see the human-faced arachnid. Could she see the dark side of life form? Ruewen was an ability user, but why was there no sign before? Or had his ability just awakened? Was it the stimulation from the human-faced arachnid? A few questions popped up in his mind, but none of them could be answered. The human-faced arachnid growled in a low voice. This was the response to Luo Nan's command. Originally, only Luo Nan could hear it. But now Rui Wen, the cold and silent young girl on the fighting stage, raised her head once more. Her gaze pointed to the sky above the fighting arena. Luo Nan would be at the end of the line of sight, if it extended its line of sight to approximately 300 meters. Goodness gracious! Luo Nan clearly knew that Rui Wen could not see him, but he was still shocked fiercely. He could not help but shift. Right when he was thinking about pondering over the girl's situation, he never expected that things would come, and he would be overwhelmed. Jack ended his contemplation at this time, and his speed suddenly increased. This fellow returned to his training room in a short half a minute. He picked up the wristband he had discarded earlier, and seemed to be communicating with the outside world. Luo Nan's energy needed to be completely focused over there. Before this, he gave the human-faced arachnid another command. He told it to stay far away from Rui Wen, to stop distracting the girl's attention. After arranging everything, Luo Nan began to close the distance between him and Jack in order to increase the precision of his senses. But in the end, this was different from when he was facing his contact person. Unless Luo Nan didn't want his life anymore, it would be impossible for him to get close to Jack's side. And in this case, it was impossible to guarantee the precision of his senses. In the end, Luo Nan took the risk to advance to a distance of approximately 50 meters from Jack. He was able to feel the electrical waves radiating from the wristband, but he was only able to track it for a short distance before he had to give up. Jack's communication time was extremely short, and the direction of the transmission was clearly pointing outside of the Deshang building. The distance was so far that it far exceeded the limits of his senses. Maybe he was contacting Yin Yonghua? Luo Nan could only make blind guesses. And then, Jack entered the training room's changing room and changed his clothes. A white shirt, a black bow tie and black trousers. These were the standard fighting referee attire. Then he shot a cold glance at Luo Nan's position, went straight out the door, and entered the high-speed elevator. He wanted to go to the fighting arena? That gaze was clearly a provocation. It was very clear that some matters in the fighting arena had been exposed. The possibility of it being the human-faced arachnid was very small. Then, Crag burst. Jack's here. Which one? Where? Crag burst was stunned for a moment, but he quickly came back to his senses. He immediately looked for Luo Nan to confirm. Chapter 120. This was a rebellion. Luo Nan flew into a sudden rage. The heavily chained crow shook, forcefully pulling the human-faced arachnid back. The human-faced arachnid's body let out a hissing shriek as the fire cloud collapsed and dispersed. It was clear that it had suffered greatly. The human-faced arachnid's reaction was so miserable that it slightly dampened Luo Nan's anger. It seemed that his control over the human-faced arachnid hadn't lost its effectiveness. He thought about how this fellow had just saved his life, and his heart softened. Moreover, what was the use of being angry at this kind of person who had no intelligence and only acted on instinct? Luo Nan was baffled. The human-faced arachnid had always been obedient ever since it was bound by the heavily chained crow. It didn't do anything out of line with Rui Wen before. Why did it suddenly go out of control? He needed to think carefully about the problems within. At this time, Jack took the high-speed elevator and walked through the special tunnel. He had already arrived at the combat arena, but he did not directly show himself. Instead, he entered the VIP box and met with the contact person. He did not say anything useful for a while. Luo Nan concentrated his energy to consider the problem of the human-faced arachnid. Communicating with the human-faced arachnid that had no intelligence to speak of was a very strenuous matter. It wouldn't tell Luo Nan what it was thinking. Luo Nan could only rely on himself to search for the problematic link within the chaotic information. According to the flexible e-ink screen, his current analysis of the human-faced arachnid was 2%. In other words, 98% of the messages were garbled. Trying to find something comprehensible and useful from this garbled code was really What is this? Luo Nan's soul body faintly rippled. He was shocked by the dynamic image that was suddenly reflected before his eyes. The image should be the external information that the human-faced arachnid had absorbed before. So it was straightforward and clear. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment before he quickly recognized that this was a complete diagram of the human body's structure. There were even mechanical components mixed within. As for the specimen, it was undoubtedly Jack. Luo Nan used the human-faced arachnid to pry into the mysteries of Jack's body. Luo Nan's main focus was placed on the activity of Jack's brain. He only skimmed over the other aspects. But Luo Nan never expected that the human-faced arachnid would actually record the entire scene of Jack's body. Moreover, the human-faced arachnid used a form that Luo Nan was unable to understand to make an integration. What appeared in front of Luo Nan right now was a scene that seemed like a scene from a movie. As for the time period it appeared, it was right before Jack ignited the format of fire, right before the human-faced arachnid was completely blasted out. So Luo Nan saw that the dynamo core had split into a myriad of fine filaments. They pierced through the blood vessels and nerves, spreading throughout Jack's entire body. They instantly opened up a complex, yet complete structure. The energy that came from every part of Jack's body, whether it was physical or mechanical, was integrated and transformed under this structure. At that moment, Jack seemed to have transformed into a precise piece of equipment controlled by a super chip. His position, time, and output were all perfectly coordinated. Because of this, the highly concentrated internal pressure didn't destroy his body at the first moment. Instead, he stepped on the dangerous boundary and successfully transported the densely woven electric fire back to the area where the nucleus and the dynamo core were located. The dynamo core lit up under the high-energy convergence. The originally flickering electric light on the spiritual plane became bright and dazzling. It was precisely during this process that the energy within Jack's body completed an inconceivable qualitative transformation. In other words, it crossed a dimension from the plane of reality and touched upon the spiritual realm. Ignition successful. Nice. Luo Nan's soul body suddenly spun in a circle to calm his excited emotions. He didn't know how this ignition method was different from that of a normal burner, but this was the first time he had seen the entire ignition process of the format of fire. Even if the true core steps weren't revealed, the crucial step of energy transformation should be completed within the dynamo core. But it didn't matter. This concept and train of thought was already priceless. Whether it was Quantum Corporation or some even larger power, their research train of thought on the burner line was the same as opening it up to Luo Nan. Luo Nan thought about how Quantum Corporation had spent over a decade to suddenly obtain a project worth $1 trillion in investment. He felt a deep pleasure of revenge. The problem was, this wasn't the end. Unexpectedly, this scene, which had been highly integrated by the human-faced arachnid, continued to be edited. The scene that appeared next was much more blurry, and the time node rewound to the moment when the dynamo core split into a myriad of fine filaments to support the structure. The image of Jack's body turned illusory. Large areas of his body were erased. All that was left was a frame constructed from the dynamo core, blood vessels, nerves, and a portion of the body's tissues. The energy passed through this frame, converged, and ignited. Luo Nan could see that this was a replay of the ignition process from before. The replay highlighted the importance of the structure itself. It erased the irrelevant branches and pushed the marvels of ignition forward once more. This also made Luo Nan think of the self-formatting. Wasn't his current body structure similar in nature? An exquisite reference. Perhaps he could refer to this model in his cultivation in the future? Luo Nan's sighs of emotion had just appeared when the continuous advancement of the scene cut carried out a second replay. It was still starting from the beginning, but this time, the complex structure supported by the dynamo core became a blurry background. There were only simple lines, straight or arcs, connecting the key nodes of the structure. Or perhaps they were simply born out of thin air. Perhaps they were magnetic lines. Luo Nan had to admit that he was completely unable to understand it. But, when the straight lines and arcs were pieced together, they formed a complete and sealed figure in the center. When it finally appeared before his eyes, a certain trembling feeling rose from the bottom of Luo Nan's heart. It dominated his everything. It was a kind of throbbing that penetrated the darkness and illuminated the splendor. A regular tetrahedron might not necessarily be that straight. An inscribed ball wasn't completely tangent to all four sides. An outbounding ball wasn't perfectly connected to all four ends. But this structure, this silhouette, and the marvelous concept that emerged from it were like a heavy fist that smashed into Luo Nan's heart. His chaotic state of mind was smashed into a chaotic mess. All that was left was the figure that had long since assimilated with his mind. The figure that was completely branded into the depths of his soul. A regular tetrahedron, and an inscribed and circumscribed sphere. The human-faced arachnid's analytical figure, and Luo Nan's visualization figure miraculously intertwined and connected at this moment. The throbbing that only belonged to the adherent of formatting theory completely exploded. Luo Nan froze on the spot. He forgot to restrain the human-faced arachnid. The arachnid obtained its freedom and displayed its simple-minded nature. It let out another sharp hiss and pounced towards Rue when on the fighting stage. Luo Nan reacted halfway, but he didn't stop the arachnid. This was because the scene of his clairvoyance was completely different at this moment. The human-faced arachnid didn't want to treat Rue Wen as food. Its pounce was more like a connection. It pushed close to Rue Wen's body and stirred up turbid clouds of fire, nearly submerging Rue Wen completely. The sparkling and translucent spiritual seed was like a star that pierced through the layer of clouds. It emitted a resplendent brilliance. Rue Wen and the human-faced arachnid shook at the same time. The arachnid began to circle around Rue Wen. Rue Wen's gaze followed half a circle. She slowly closed her eyes when she was about to turn around. Chapter 121. The shape of a circle is still too abstract. I need to be more concrete. Luo Nan stared fixedly at the fighting stage. He looked at the special connection between the human-faced arachnid and Rue Wen. At the same time, the spectators on the stands were also watching. All they saw was Rue Wen's closed eyes. For this reason they ridiculed, mocked and cursed from the stands. They used all the filthy words they could to release the pressure and emotions they had accumulated in their daily lives. They released the sense of accomplishment and superiority that came from dictating the life and death of others. But in essence, they were a bunch of blind people, a bunch of stupid pigs and sheep that were still cheering happily on the altar. What they didn't know was that with every obscenity that came out of their mouths, at the same time as they released their negative emotions, they also ignited their vitality and threw it into the sealed arena, turning into a part of the burning cloud of fire, and ultimately returning to nothingness. Luo Nan had no intention of despising these people. He had witnessed the 2 replays of the human-faced arachnid, and this told him a fact. The visualization diagram was not a mysterious thing that could be explained at any time. It contained a very complicated structure and extremely profound basic principles. What he saw was only a highly abstract shape. The 2 replays, especially the second one, proved that the operation of the visualization diagram had completely exceeded his level of understanding. He didn't have the right to overestimate his own eyesight, and he couldn't delude himself into trying to understand the deeper truth now. Mocking these spectators was like the pot calling the kettle black. The only thing he could do now was to maintain his reverence for the unknown and continue to observe and verify. Therefore, Luo Nan did everything he could to pay attention to the changes happening on the fighting stage. His perspective was a combination of the material and the mental plane, as well as his understanding of the turbid flow of emotions. Every second of observation and feeling brought about an astonishing consumption. All of this was worth it. Gradually, the actual images of the human-faced arachnid and Rue Wen became blurry from Luo Nan's perspective. The fighting stage, and even the entire fighting arena, also became blurry. All of this turned into a visual and symbolic picture. Luo Nan saw a sea of burning clouds. The human-faced arachnid was a spider demon that swam within the sea of clouds. Rue Wen, on the other hand, was the only shining star in this turbid sea of clouds. Bright, penetrating and sharp. The radiance of the stars was like the sharp edge of the sword. The human-faced arachnid circled around the star, constantly drawing closer. It drove the turbid flow of emotions to conceal the light of the star. However, no matter how many negative emotions were entwined in the clouds, the ice-cold edge would always be able to cut them down, not staining them in the slightest. During this process, the edge of the stellar sword was also being tempered, becoming sharper and sharper. After dozens and hundreds of attacks, a large amount of turbid emotions did not even have the chance to pounce on it before they were turned into nothingness under the shining sharp light. But no matter how many he destroyed, the burning sea of clouds continued to advance. The sea of clouds roared and cursed. The excited spectators provided all of this. This group of pigs and sheep that had their blood drawn, and their blades drawn, were completely unaware that the sealed arena had already become a giant altar. Their vitality was the blood that flowed recklessly on the altar. It was the only paint that painted the burning sea of clouds. Finally, the human-faced arachnid let out a sharp hiss. It took the initiative to launch a substantial attack, throwing itself at Rue 1. However, Rue 1's stellar sword edge had been tempered to a new level after experiencing the impact of the thousands of turbid clouds of fire. The human-faced arachnid had yet to truly approach. It just received the light of the edge, and countless fine wounds had already been sliced open on its malevolent demonic body. This was not an act. It was true damage. Luonan could feel the pain of the human-faced arachnid, but the deepest part of its reaction transmitted a joyful message. Joyful? The human-faced arachnid continued to advance, truly intersecting with the stellar sword edge. In an instant, one of its limbs was even sliced off. It fell into the burning sea of clouds and ignited with a rumble. The human-faced arachnid let out a long hiss of pain, but it turned around and threw itself over. It swallowed its own burning limb in a single gulp, trembling with excitement. Its aura weakened during this process, but it clearly congealed quite a bit. Correspondingly, its foundation structure was shaky, and its situation improved somewhat. So it was like this. Luonan finally understood. The corresponding information was completely analyzed at this moment, and flowed through his mind. There was no doubt that the human-faced arachnid was using Rue 1. It discovered Rue 1's ability, but it was intimidated by Luonan's command. It couldn't directly devour her, so it used a roundabout method in an attempt to use this ability to obtain benefits. The human-faced arachnid wanted to reach a dynamic equilibrium with Rue 1. It had been attacking and oppressing all this time, but it controlled the intensity of the fire. It tempered Rue 1's stellar sword edge to become even sharper, all for the sake of allowing Rue 1 to truly threaten it. This sounded very strange, but the truth was that the human-faced arachnid was incapable of achieving self-growth. It needed to devour foreign objects, including its own kind, in order to achieve individual evolution. The current situation was just a variant of devouring. The human-faced arachnid borrowed Rue 1's stellar sword edge to chop off its shaky parts and reconstruct its foundation. As long as it wasn't truly fatal, it would gladly endure the pain, even if it was riddled with 1,000 holes, and its limbs flew in all directions. As for the vitality it consumed, it was naturally provided by the idiotic pigs and goats in the surroundings. The only ones that were completely damaged here were these people. This form was brimming with a sense of malevolence and bitterness. It was incomparably compatible with the human-faced arachnid's usual image. From the human-faced arachnid's perspective, this special environment that it had created with its own hands was a whetstone, a furnace, and an altar. It had placed itself on the altar. Rue 1 was the one who received the greatest benefits from this. Luonan still didn't know what ability Rue 1 had awakened to in the end. But he knew that the human-faced arachnid had an astonishing potential when he saw its miserable appearance. But in order to stimulate this potential, one must not be disturbed by external objects. One must have a clear and penetrating mental state. Only then could one withstand the turbid flow, and remain untainted by even a speck of dust despite being scoured 100 times, or 1,000 times. Therefore, Rue 1 was also on the altar. The human-faced arachnid was using her, and vice versa. The two used each other and polished each other to push their own level all the way to higher levels. Even now, they still couldn't see the upper limit. Such a scene might not be completely real, but it was a part that Luo Nan could understand and extrapolate. The overall composition of the scene was faintly connected to the visualization diagram he was most accustomed to. Rue 1 and the human-faced arachnid occupied the most core positions. They could be said to be inscribed spheres, representing a kind of endlessly circulating internal power. The fighting arena was the boundary of the sealed diagram. It was the external sphere, representing the external environment and energy supply. As for the tetrahedron, wasn't that Luo Nan? The human-faced arachnid was within Luo Nan's system. All of its actions were essentially variations and extensions of the system. So in the end, the one who provided this framework was Luo Nan himself. This realization rose in Luo Nan's mind, and he suddenly understood where the consumption of observation had gone. That was the price and challenge that must be paid as a carrier. He wasn't standing on the altar, but he was the altar. Whether or not Luo Nan's format pyramid could accommodate the endlessly rising levels of both sides, whether or not it could bear the conflicting power of both sides, whether or not it could provide sufficient support, was the key to the success or failure of this sacrificial ritual. Once the framework collapsed, the balance would be lost. Either Rue 1 would kill the human-faced arachnid, or the human-faced arachnid would destroy Rue 1. There was no third possibility. Even if Rue 1 died, it didn't mean that the human-faced arachnid had gone against Luo Nan's will. This was because the entire framework had failed. Of course, Luo Nan would certainly suffer the backlash of the framework's collapse at that time. He didn't know what would happen when that time came. Human-faced arachnid. Luo Nan gnashed his teeth. Right at this moment, a spotlight suddenly shone down from above the fighting stage, illuminating the edge of the area. The live DJ played the whistling sound of an airplane skimming through the air at a low altitude. A long wait, a bloody future. The Beast King battle that everyone is looking forward to, our other protagonist, has arrived. The ending sound was a moaning sigh. It was a pretentious posture, but it gently plucked a chord in the hearts of all the spectators. The whistling sound that followed caused the entire fighting arena to shake. Chapter 122. Where the spotlights shone, the ground first sank, then rose up again, and a huge metal box appeared above it. Before it had completely entered the range of the spotlights, they could hear the sound of friction and collision. It was very strange. The metal box was the size of a small container. Its length was close to 6 meters, and its height and width were also more than 2 meters. Compared to the standard boxing ring, its length was very close. When this metal box appeared in front of everyone, the fighting arena was first stifled, and then the shouts from the stands turned into boos and laughter. F*CK, big guy. This physique, is it a brown bear? A Siberian tiger? A black caiman? Shameless enough, vicious enough. Continue to raise the stakes? Can we change the bet? Clearly, the fighting arena's actions had caused some controversy, but most people were still happy to see it happen. They didn't care about the outcome of the bet. They just wanted to see that bloody scene. Of course, it would be better if there was a bit of suspense. A one-sided situation ultimately made people feel that something was missing. At this time, the front of the metal box opened, but nothing came out. Instead, there was a loud ong-ong sound, as well as the sound of an excited collision. The force was not small, but the sound. Just as the group of people looked at each other, the entire metal box opened, revealing the situation inside. The audience was stunned. Inside the metal box, there were actually 2 cages about the same size. One was a dark, translucent glass box, and it was impossible to see what was inside. The other was an ordinary-looking iron cage. The fellow running around inside had a long face and tusks, a thick body, thick skin and iron bones. It was indeed a huge creature, and its strength was not small either, knocking against the iron cage with clanging sounds. This was a wild boar. Alright, from a practical point of view, if 99% of the people in the fighting arena were thrown down and made to face this beast that weighed more than a few hundred kilograms, there would only be death. But the style was not right. What they wanted to see was a shuraba with flesh and blood flying everywhere. not a farce of people chasing each other and bumping into each other. Besides, was any wild boar worthy of making them wait for more than 10 minutes? Boos rang out. It didn't matter which company's boss or which department's official they were during the day. At this moment, all the spectators and gamblers on the stands had completely thrown away their reservations and vented their emotions to their heart's content. Whoever they didn't like, they would boo and scold. Amidst the deafening boos, the DJ did not dare to make a sound. On the boxing stage, Ruewen still stood quietly with her eyes closed. Below the boxing ring, the front of the black glass box next to the iron cage silently opened. The box was still pitch black and didn't reveal anything. However, the wild boar that had been restless in the iron cage on the other side suddenly screeched, as if someone had stabbed a butcher's knife into its stomach. The boos in the arena were forcibly cut off by this ear-piercing cry, and then the crowd of spectators saw the wild boar in the cage desperately trying to get out. The collision was so fierce that it actually caused the entire iron cage to shift. The two parallel boxes were forcibly pulled apart by almost 3 meters until they crashed into the boxing ring. They continued to exert force, causing the boxing ring to rumble. What the hell? Luonan was a bit annoyed and a bit anxious. The sacrificial ritual had reached a critical moment. Countless lines appeared within the burning sea of clouds, building an even more exquisite structure. It was created by the human-faced arachnid's valiant instincts. Profound and unfathomable laws and principles were contained within. Luonan didn't try to analyze it. The human-faced arachnid surpassed him in terms of level. There was no meaning in forcefully deciphering it. The only thing he could do right now was to maintain the framework of the sacrificial altar, to make it maintain stability. He was doing quite well right now, and the two people on the sacrificial altar were doing quite well as well. The play of tricks in the fighting arena just now had caused the supply of turbid emotions to be a bit scattered. That wasn't a big deal. Blindly using a fierce fire might not be able to cook rice. The slower the fire, the better the cooking would be. This bunch of idiots, pigs and sheep. They were simply hammering nails into their own coffins. But at this time, the wild boar crazily rammed into the boxing ring, and the interference from the outside world suddenly increased. The human-faced arachnid wasn't a big deal, but Luonan was really worried that Ruewen would get distracted. While Luonan was worried, the crowd of spectators were in high spirits. Oh, what a trick! Deliberately setting up suspense and suppressing one's desires had been used many times. This was what the spectators loved the most. Their minds were firmly hooked, and the sounds of booing and cursing completely disappeared. The fighting arena actually became quite a bit quieter. Something finally came out from the black glass box at this time. A long forked tongue stuck to the ground. It flickered in and out, and trillions of sensory cells replaced the functions of eyes and nose on its rough surface to detect the outside environment. Snake or lizard? Hurry up and start. Hurry up and show your head. It seemed to feel the restless emotions of the outside world. The thing in the glass box finally stuck its long and narrow head out. It looked to be of the lizard type, but the spectators felt that something was wrong halfway through. This head was nearly 2 meters long, right? Its head was mainly occupied by a long, narrow and deep gaping mouth. Its front end was practically reaching the iron cage beneath the boxing ring. The pitiful wild boar was about to bring the cage and jump onto the stage. The length of the body was calculated from the length of the head. How could the glass box hold it? In reality, the flexible body that seemed to be swimming in the air extended out a full 4 meters in length. There was still a tail that hadn't come out yet. The mouth occupied half the length of the body that was revealed. This made its external appearance look closer to that of a crocodile, but it was much taller. Its forelimbs were extremely thick and solid, supporting its belly far off the ground. Its forked tongue still hung down, sticking to the ground as it flicked in and out. It looked strange and cautious. What was this thing? Just as Luonan was puzzled, Crag burst let out a low roar. CTMB. Before the coarse curses could fall, the monster's 2-meter-long mouth opened wide without any warning. Thousands of dense, cold, and sharp teeth lined up in 4 rows. The camera faithfully recorded the scene, and a close-up shot was made through the broadcast screen. The scene was clearly displayed before everyone's eyes. The entire arena sucked in a breath of cold air. Protruding forward, biting, closing, swallowing. The monster performed a series of concise movements like this, and a glaring bloody light sprayed out in front of it. The wild boar that weighed several hundred kilograms, including the solid iron cage that surrounded it, was suddenly cut in half. It was swallowed by the monster in one gulp. Screams rang out from all directions. A rare situation of half being quiet and half being hysterical appeared in the entire fighting arena. And at this time, the enormous broadcast screen above the fighting arena was retracted, causing the area above the fighting arena to be even more spacious. Then a maglev-type floating platform descended from the opening in the upper level of the fighting arena. There were no handrails, nor were there any fences. Jack stood steadily atop the platform. He wore a white shirt, black trousers, and a black bow tie. He was the standard attire of a referee, but he looked down from above. His face was expressionless, and he turned a blind eye to the strange situation in the fighting arena. He raised his hands slightly and separated them to two sides. One side represented Rue 1, who was standing silently. The other side represented the brutal monster that was swallowing its food. He spoke with a calm and emotionless tone. Marauder Rue 1. Mutant Great Maw Basilisk. Beast King battle begin. Mutant? Was it really a freaking mutant? Chapter 123. Oh, damn it. Whose idea was this? I love him to death. Hurry up and start. Start. Don't tell me I have to wait for it to finish eating that pig and bring an iron cage? Look, those 4 rows of sharp teeth. What would it feel like to have a slender body roll around inside? Ah, who's going to give me a close-up? You on the stage. You on the stage. Open your eyes. Look, what a cute baby. The so-called Beast King battle didn't immediately begin, but the spectators in the fighting arena were all brimming with interest. When the fighting arena brought out the mutant as the main character of this battle, everyone knew that the course of the battle would be completely one-sided. They could only enjoy the prelude and the conclusion. Right now, Rue 1 continued to stand quietly with her eyes closed. This was already the best posture to maintain suspense. Some people were really worried that this flat-chested witch would witness the terror of the Great Maw Basilisk with her own eyes. This fight would turn into a hunting show for the mutant early on. CTMB. CTMB. Crag burst spat out obscenities as he extended his hand to touch the transparent protective wall in front of him. Right now he had to break through this obstacle in order to rescue Rue 1 from the jaws of the mutant. Giving him 8 to 10 punches was obviously not a problem, but this required a process. If by any chance the Great Maw Basilisk's vicious nature was aroused, then even 10,000 deaths wouldn't be enough to redeem himself. Crag Burst was regretting right now. Why didn't he put a stop to this damned road of adjudication earlier? Why did such a dangerous situation occur? Crag Burst quickly calculated a few times and confirmed that he needed at least 5 to 7 punches in order to blast open the protective wall. And this was under the premise that the fighting arena's defensive power didn't interfere. The uncertainty was too high. He needed to obtain support. Scout. I need a bit of time. Cragburst had just spoken when a small map that was clearly drawn at the last minute was sent over from the Psychic Wave Network. It clearly drew a route from his current location to a certain area in the upper levels. Luo Nan's voice transmitted over. Don't force your way in. Enter from the VIP room. That's where Jack just came from. It's the only shortcut. You still have time. This damned lizard will finish digesting its food. The Great Maw Basilisk only needs 2 minutes to digest its food. Then 2 minutes it is. If it's not enough, then I'll take it. Okay. Cragburst didn't say anything else. He turned around and left. Right now he could only choose to believe in his teammate, and Luo Nan's previous performance was worthy of his trust. Cragburst had just walked into the lounge when Jack's gaze swept over from the skies above the fighting arena. This minute movement was undoubtedly exposed by Luo Nan's mental senses. Luo Nan's mind jolted, but he recalled the most important information. He rushed to warn Cragburst. Pay attention. Jack has discovered you. He's a burner. It has a kind of controlling magnetic field, and its strength is not to be underestimated. Understood. Cragburst was very surprised, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he sped up and ran wildly through the hallway. The mafia guards had spotted him, but no one could stop his assault. Jack, who was on the maglev platform, must have received the relevant information. However, his face was still cold and expressionless. This guy, Luonan, had heard Jack talk to his contact about the little darling of Mr. Ma's family. Luonan had thought that Jack was some sort of ferocious beast. He never thought that Jack would actually be so ruthless and shameless to this extent. A mutant. The current situation was much more dangerous than what Cragburst had observed. The human-faced arachnid and Rue, when continued to maintain a cruel and fragile balance, because the sacrificial ritual was still ongoing. Even though the level of the two sides was pushed higher, Luonan didn't know when this would end. As long as the sacrificial ritual wasn't over, Ruewen wouldn't be able to free herself to face the enemy. The instant collapse of the balance would take her life a step earlier. Right now, the person who was working the hardest in the fighting arena was Luonan. He had to maintain the entire framework of the altar from collapsing. He also had to pay attention to the changes in the situation. He had to guide Cragburst's path in time. He also had to lock onto Jack and keep a close eye on the Great Maw Basilisk to prevent any new abnormal movements from occurring. Multitasking. Panoramic mental senses transmitted information from all directions in parallel, forcing him to deal with it. A single mishap could lead to a complete collapse. He didn't know that he was an omniscient god, but he was doing the work of a god. The Great Maw Basilisk's meal was nearing its end. It had swallowed the other half of the wild boar and the iron cage in a short few dozen seconds. Its enormous belly was about to touch the ground, but then it flattened at a speed visible to the eye. The strong acid in its stomach possessed a terrifying digestive ability. The several 100-kilogram wild boar, and at least half of the iron cage's weight, were digested by the Great Maw Basilisk in a short minute. The relevant energy was infused into the Great Maw Basilisk's entire body, increasing the temperature of the blood by a bit. At this time, its thick double eyelids lifted up. Dark yellow cracks of ice appeared on its enormous eyeballs. It gave people the feeling that it was callous and emotionless. It assessed its surroundings. From the Great Maw Basilisk's perspective, what it hated the most were the noisemakers all around it. But it had already used its tail to test the protective wall during the process of eating. It wasn't easy to break through. In that case, it would give up the hard and make it easy. It would first devour the simple target. This was its only choice. The Great Maw Basilisk stared at its target on the fighting stage. Its long tongue stuck to the ground and sniffed, digging out deeper information. This slender creature actually possessed a certain level of threat. As an apex predator, this was a situation that it absolutely couldn't allow. The Great Maw Basilisk's underdeveloped vocal cords didn't have the ability to raise its voice and roar. But the low growling sound it produced was enough. When the low and deep sound waves spread through the loudspeaker and spread throughout the entire arena, the close-up shots of its icy-cold pupils were transmitted to every broadcast screen. The spectators' hearts palpitated for a moment before they excitedly stood up one after another. They raised their arms and shouted, "Adjudicate! Adjudicate! Adjudicate!" The atmosphere in the arena was about to explode, not for anything else, but for the special term mutant. In the 30 years after the Third World War, mutants had always occupied the top position of the Earth's food chain. They had firmly trampled the original overlords, humans, beneath their feet. The wilderness, the oceans, and even parts of the air had all become their domain. The entire world's population exceeded 10 billion, and they were squeezed into 88 large metropolitan areas. For a time, they were in imminent danger. Even if the present humans developed the deep blue walkers, changed their tactics, and continuously obtained battle results, they still wouldn't dare to say that they had completely entered the strategic counteroffensive phase. Recovering lost territory could only be called a distant goal. This was the spiritual memory that mutants gave to the people of the present generation, especially the generation after the war. At this very moment, The bloody scene in the center of the fighting arena caused the spectators to feel fear. But the layout of the fighting arena and its powerful defenses gave them positive hints. They were the true masters of the fighting arena. They were the powerful ones who enjoyed everything. The stimulation brought about by this unique position of dominance was something that no other ferocious beast could ever hope to achieve. This illusory power and dominant position caused the flames in the spectators' hearts to burst forth in an even more intense manner. The people in the back row stood up, and the spectators in the front row crowded forward. They squeezed against the transparent protective wall, striving to get a closer look at the great maw basilisk's savage appearance. Luonan coldly swept his gaze over this chaotic scene. Even though these spectators were the largest source of noise, they were the most insignificant group within the structure of the altar. Who would pay attention to pigs and sheep that were about to run out of blood? But a subtle change appeared at this very moment. Everyone stood up and shouted crazily. There were some people who weren't able to truly stand up. Chapter 124. No one discovered the abnormality here. Everyone's gazes were focused on the fighting stage, appreciating the fight that was destined to end quickly. The first one. Luonan's energy could no longer be divided at this time. He didn't have the strength, nor the need to lament over the fading of life. He only sensed that a certain marvelous element was born within the altar, as this person's flame of life burned out. The element content was too minute. He couldn't see any obvious changes. But with the first one, there was a second, a third, and many more. The relevant numbers within the range of his mental senses increased without end. The accumulation of the marvelous element didn't increase. It was like the ratio of a certain pigment. It changed from light to intense. This was the color of death. The blood would eventually run dry. The blood was cut open at the same time. Then the corresponding death of exhaustion would arrive at about the same time. The one who collapsed right now was just the first wave. Luonan had never thought of killing anyone, just like how he didn't think of saving anyone at this moment. He needed to focus on the framework of the altar. He needed to focus on the subtle changes brought about by the infiltration of the new element. The death of each individual was a challenge to the supply of the burning cloud of fire. However, looking at the overall structure, the addition of the death paint formed a complementary situation, where one side was weakened while the other side was strengthened. The latter couldn't provide energy, but it built a new structure within the framework. It was like a bridge, leading the sacrificer to a plane that had never been reached before. From the frenzy of life to the deep silence of death. Whether it was the human-faced arachnid, Rue-1, or even Luonan, they all touched upon this straightforward and deep domain. Luonan was a bit spellbound. The pressure of information that was about to clog suddenly erased a bit within this deep silence of death. A lot of information had value on the plane of life, but it was meaningless once it entered the domain of death. The blending of life and death was like a filter. It filtered out many things. This could be considered a type of comprehension, but it was only at a very shallow level, especially when compared to Rue-1. When the domain of death opened up to them, Luonan discovered that Rue-1 possessed an inconceivable keenness towards this domain. Her keenness far surpassed Luonan's, and the human-faced arachnid's degree. Every drop of life was able to bring her new harvests. Luonan vaguely felt as if Rue-1 had come to his side. She stood side by side with him as she watched the flames of life extinguish, disintegrate, and evolve on all four sides of the stands. She obtained information that he was unable to comprehend from within. But from another perspective, Luonan was originally unable to discover this information. But because of Rue-1's existence, he was able to come into contact with this information in advance. He didn't know what use this had. But one thing was clear. Rue-1 had discovered and utilized the power of death. This was something that the human-faced arachnid was incapable of doing. Because of this, the balance at the center of the altar was suddenly broken. Rue-1 and the human-faced arachnid continued to increase in rank. However, the current situation was that Rue-1 would advance 2 ranks for every rank the human-faced arachnid advanced. In just a few breaths of time, The internal force that sharpened and pushed each other forward was on the verge of collapse. The rules of the sacrificial ceremony were: whoever became the weaker would become the sacrificial offering. The human-faced arachnid let out an ear-piercing screech. This was the situation it had created. It had placed itself on the altar, but in the end, it had become a sacrifice. But its survival instincts drove it to struggle. Even if it was destined to perish, it didn't want to be the first. Luonan watched this scene. He watched the burning cloud of fire grow more and more clamorous. He watched the spectators in the fighting arena shout like a tsunami. He also watched the sharp edge of the starry sky illuminate the gloom, and he watched the spider demon struggle in its death throes. Inexplicably, he didn't have any fluctuations of emotion. It was as if he was watching a pantomime that had nothing to do with him. Or perhaps it was just a formula that was arranged and calculated on the surface of a paper. It wasn't that he had lost the ability to feel emotions. Rather, he simply didn't have the luxury to display his emotions. Maintaining the framework of the altar had already overdrawn all of his energy. Cragburst's transmission came at this time. Scout, I've arrived at the VIP room. Holy crap. It's a giant lizard. The great maw basilisk began to move. It slowly turned to an angle and determined the optimal path to hunt. According to its habits, it was about to launch an attack immediately. Cragburst just so happened to rush into the VIP room. He knocked out the contact who was about to scream in shock. He saw everything that was happening in the arena from that angle, and he gave a loud warning. Speed up. Don't get distracted. Luonan's message was calm and peaceful to the extreme. Cragburst was clearly stifled, but he still listened to Luonan's words. He crashed into the secret passageway of the VIP room and made a mad dash towards Jack's location. Luonan didn't pay special attention to the great maw basilisk's movements. This was because his mind was unable to bear the heavy burden at this moment. It had already automatically adjusted itself to be divided into two parts, within the framework and outside the framework. The former was primary, the latter was secondary. The priority was undoubtedly to resolve the situation within the framework. As for outside the framework, then he would resolve it within the framework. This was truly a marvelous dichotomy. Luonan's thoughts stirred, and the heavily chained crow hummed with a trembling hum. It crossed the air and headed straight for the great maw basilisk. Luonan didn't know if he could control this mutant. His goal wasn't set that high. All he did was use his own unique method to pull what was outside the framework into the framework. As for entering the framework, who knew if he would become a priest or a sacrificial offering? The great maw basilisk moved. The surrounding spectators screamed themselves hoarse. Its four thick and solid limbs moved quickly, and it easily stepped onto the meter-tall fighting stage. Its enormous body swam through the air, and its enormous mouth, which could bite through steel, split open as it charged towards Rue 1. Luonan watched all of this coldly. The heavily chained crow had already pierced through the great maw basilisk's head. The marvelous connection was completed. From his perspective, the great maw basilisk wasn't pouncing towards Rue 1. It was pouncing towards the framework of his altar. It wasn't a collision. It was just a leap. The plane of reality, the mental plane, and the rendering of emotions. Everything interweaved into one place. His altar's framework was truly connected to every plane, towering majestically. Rue 1 still didn't open her eyes, but she clearly sensed it. She staggered her feet and dodged to the limit in this crucial moment. She dodged to the front of the great maw basilisk's charge. Anyone would dodge when faced with the charge of a high-speed truck. The spectators weren't disappointed. It's good that she dodged. It's exciting when there's a back and forth. The cheers from the spectators were like a landslide and a tsunami. But amidst this roar, a weak hissing sound inexplicably penetrated into everyone's ears. The great maw basilisk in Rue 1's body staggered. Its enormous body was nearly the same length as the fighting stage. Perhaps it had charged too quickly, but it lost some control. It was unable to stop itself after landing on the ground. It directly leaped over the fighting stage. It actually stumbled and stumbled as it charged straight towards the spectators behind it. They watched the terrifying mutant charge towards them. They clearly knew that it was impossible for the great maw basilisk to crash into the protective wall. but the spectators closer to the fighting stage, especially the beauties who were responsible for creating the atmosphere, still screamed in a half-real, half-fake manner. But halfway there, the screams became hysterical. The body of the enormous beast, which was over 5 meters long and weighed over 800 kilograms, was black and heavy like steel. Everyone could see it wither at a speed that could be seen by the naked eye. It suddenly shrunk by a size. The bones that supported its body also lost their hardness. Its forelimbs broke one after the other. It simply slid on the ground and crashed into the protective wall with a bang. It didn't struggle. The callous pupils behind its enormous eyelids had already been corroded into 2 enormous black holes. The great maw basilisk lay paralyzed on the ground. In only 2 or 3 breaths of time, its back, neck, head, chest, and abdomen, large chunks of flesh fell off one after another. In the blink of an eye, all that was left was a dense skeleton wrapped in blood vessels and connective tissue. Defeat and death were presented before everyone's eyes in the most bizarre and cruel form. Chapter 125. In the face of sudden stimulation that exceeded the limits of endurance, screaming was perhaps the only way for people to breathe before they suffocated. The exclamations and screams formed a chaotic hurricane that swept through the entire arena. There were more than 5 spectators on the viewing platform, directly opposite the great maw basilisk. They couldn't withstand this wave of impact, and their eyes rolled back as they fell to the ground. At this time, the phenomenon of collapsing was no longer an exception. More and more people noticed it, and more people were infected. The arena was equipped with medical personnel, but the incessant cries for help made the limited medical personnel at a loss as to what to do. And when these fragments of information were gathered together, a clear scale was revealed, and a bone-piercing chill descended upon the arena. A shiver ran through everyone. Luonan calmly looked down at all of this. In his eyes, death covered life. More and more information lost its meaning, and the framework structure of the altar grew clearer and clearer because of this. To put it bluntly, when the great maw basilisk was led into the altar's frame, regardless of whether it was inside or outside the frame, the entire situation suddenly became clear. Under the framework of the altar, the great maw basilisk's killing intent directly constituted a challenge to Rue 1. On the material plane, the great maw basilisk's fleshly body was very powerful. It was completely at the level of a running heavy truck. Moreover, it possessed extraordinary flexibility and destructive power. However, on the mental plane, this fellow could only be considered to be at the level of an intelligent beast. On the current level of the altar, there was an insurmountable distance between him and Rue 1, and the human-faced arachnid. Then, as a matter of course, the great maw basilisk was reduced to a target for slaughter. It was also an excellent scapegoat. The human-faced arachnid's struggles were effective. At the juncture of life and death, it practically slaughtered its way into the great maw basilisk's body, along with Rue 1's star edge. The abundant life force of blood chi, and blood became the best shield and substitute for the human-faced arachnid. The strong pressure that had been accumulating all this time, the iron rules of the sacrificial offerings that were almost certain to die, were all pushed in together and carried by the great maw basilisk. At this moment, the great maw basilisk was the converging point of all the backlash energy. The human-faced arachnid was able to preserve its little life. Even though it had suffered a crushing defeat in the end, and had been chopped down a level, it had still made great progress with the addition and subtraction. The only worry was that he was extremely weak and couldn't maintain his demonic body anymore. So he turned back into a demonic symbol to recuperate. The rule of the altar was that the winner takes all. Without a doubt, Rue 1 was the one who benefited the most from the entire sacrificial ceremony. The instant the great maw basilisk stepped onto the altar, Rue 1's star radiated the most resplendent rays of light. Destroying one's soul and destroying one's physical body were 2 completely different levels. There was no difference between them. However, in order to destroy both the soul and the physical body at the same time, the only way was to simultaneously interfere with both the physical and mental domains, and break through the invisible barrier between the two. Rui Wen had done it. At this time, she slowly opened her eyes. Her pupils were still serene and silent, but she only stood there. Her even breathing carried a clanging sound. As for the mental plane, the turbulent burning clouds formed pieces of emptiness. But on the other hand, those empty silhouettes were like death gods that had stepped out of the void and raised their scythes high. As the sole victor on the sacrificial altar, Rui Wen's star dominated everything. Wherever the radiance of the stars shone, she only needed a thought to squeeze out every last bit of value from the sacrificial pigs and sheep within the framework, turning them into deathly stillness. At present, the only obstacle was probably the speed at which Rui Wen was able to comprehend the information within. Luo Nan was probably the only person who could stop Rui Wen, as long as he was determined to dismantle this framework. But the corresponding backlash and the price he would have to pay made it so that he didn't have such thoughts at all. What he was doing right now was to observe the subsequent developments and changes. Unfortunately, the sealed ceiling above the fighting arena exploded open with a rumble a few seconds later. Wood shards, glass shards, and even steel fragments filled the sky. This caused quite a few spectators, who had already sunk into a fragile state of mind, to immediately pass over. Cragburst had rushed over, but at this moment, the sound of his chin hitting the ground was even clearer than the momentum he created. My God, her ability has awakened. It's at least B rank or higher. Cragburst was clearly distracted because of Rui Wen's awakening. He even forgot about the most dangerous person below him. Luonan never gave up on monitoring Jack. He immediately gave a warning. Stop him. Jack merely shot a glance at the sky from the maglev referee stage. Then his figure tilted, and he suddenly flew down. His target was none other than Rui Wen on the fighting stage. On the fighting stage, Rui Wen also aimed her gaze at Jack. The third battle of the Road of Adjudication? No, that senseless gimmick had already ended. There weren't enough people in the entire fighting arena who could endure that atmosphere. Jack understood this point very well, so he didn't make any gaudy displays. He directly activated the deep CEM field that gave Luo Nan an incomparable headache. Reality proved that the deep CEM field's effect on the material plane was quite considerable. The fighting stage, which had just been heavily stomped by the Great Maw Basilisk, couldn't bear it any longer. The central region warped and collapsed. Then the entire ground caved in. The collapse of the fighting stage and the effect of the deep CEM field affected Rui Wen's balance. She used a set of small steps to adjust herself, dodging the frontal assault of Jack in passing. Stepping barefoot on the rubble of the fighting stage didn't seem to affect her too much. But then a muffled explosion rang out. The floor beneath the fighting stage exploded with a bang, sending fragments flying everywhere. Aside from Jack, this exceeded everyone's expectations. Even Luo Nan, who possessed all-encompassing perception, didn't notice that there was an explosive device buried in the floor beneath the fighting arena. Why the hell was this prepared for this scene? Rui Wen's figure fell down unavoidably. If this was the Rui Wen from before the Beast King battle, she could only wait until she landed before making adjustments. But the current Rui Wen was already completely different. She raised her hand during the process of falling. There seemed to be no signs of exerting force at all, but a hissing sound rang out amidst the chaotic scattering of fragments in the air. All the gravel and wood along the way were sliced in half, and an extremely sharp stream of air headed straight for the diving Jack. Jack reacted quickly. He raised his right arm and heard a muffled sound. The sleeve of his shirt was torn apart. His skin split open and blood spurted out, but there was no blood at all. A metallic luster flashed beneath the layer of flesh. Jack's right arm was a part of his body's transformation. The outside was wrapped in a layer of artificial flesh, and the inside was made of an extremely hard alloy. Right now, the layer of artificial flesh could be seen corroding and withering at a visible speed. The color of the alloy underneath was a bit dim. Highly corrosive? No, it's an even purer power. The glow of Jack's bionic eyes grew stronger as he stared fixedly at Rui Wen's face. A recording device buried deep within his body was recording and transmitting key information. Chapter 126. The area below the fighting stage was a sealed elevator platform. Even further below was the cargo passageway. The Great Maw Basilisk had been transported here through this passageway before being lifted into the fighting arena. The elevator platform had already started moving at this time. It moved down at a very fast speed. Ruiwen landed steadily on the ground. Her slender yet sturdy body immediately exerted strength to launch an attack against Jack, who hadn't yet stabilized his footing. She was more confident than ever that she could kill this callous adjudicator head-on. But then a short beep rang out from an unknown place. Ruiwen's eyes suddenly widened as a powerful electric current exploded from a certain location within her chest. It instantly bombarded her internal organs and spread to her forelimbs and head. The electric current passed through her nervous system and stimulated her muscles, instantly sending Ruiwen into a rigid state. Her body instantly lost balance, and she fell straight toward Jack. "Baby, let's go home." Jack didn't feel the slightest bit surprised. He extended his hand and scooped Ruiwen up. But soon his brows furrowed as a sharp chill pierced into his skin. Even his internal organs felt a bit cold. Ruiwen's awakened ability still existed even though she had suffered an unexpected heavy injury. The skin and flesh below Jack's ribs shriveled and fell off in an instant, revealing half of his sternum constructed from alloy plates. Jack only furrowed his brows in response to this. Another pulse exploded from the depths of Ruiwen's brain in the next moment. This time, it truly erased all of her ability to counterattack and erased her consciousness. Holy crap, Kragburst was only a second late, but he could only watch helplessly as Ruiwen fell into the enemy's hands. He struck out with a fist under his great fury. The sealed elevator platform rumbled, and the surface of the platform shook. How could he have known that Jack's face was expressionless? He grabbed the unconscious Ruiwen's legs and swept her over, startling Kragburst into a rush of strength. The upper portion of the cargo passageway was already exposed on one side of the elevator platform. Jack didn't wait for Ruiwen to land. He already grabbed Ruiwen and jumped down. Kragburst didn't even think as he chased after them. But just as he entered the passageway, he saw Jack raise his handgun. Jack pulled the trigger, and a rumble exploded within the half-sealed passageway. Unexpectedly, this was a sonic bomb. Kragburst let out a muffled groan as the strengthened sound wave shook his brain. His feet were in a mess, and signs of a concussion had already appeared. Jack wasn't troubled by this. The special structure of his brain allowed him to quickly adjust. But he didn't linger, and just ran wildly through the passageway while holding Ruiwen. Luonan asked, "Are you okay?" Kragburst didn't utter a word. He crawled up and chased after him. At first, it was a little shaky, but then it returned to normal. The freight channel could carry containers, so it was very spacious. Usually, it also carried some shady goods. At the end of the passageway, there were garages on both sides. A group of gangsters in the passageway were oblivious to what had happened in the combat arena. They were gathered together, laughing and playing a large-scale AR game. The female protagonist in the game was almost broken by them. The tunnel was filled with moans and yells. Some people felt that this was not enough, and began to call the real person. However, this freight channel was still relatively remote, so the other party needed to send out a car to pick it up. The caller could only get up while cursing. He was ready to pick a car from the garage and return quickly. However, before he could even stand up straight, the metal doors of the 6 garages on both sides of the passageway opened at the same time. Identity checks, passwords, and other safety measures were all skipped. The lights of the 4-wheeled heavy trucks in the garage lit up one after another. The glaring krypton gas lamps illuminated the group of people in the middle of the passageway in a daze. They were immediately blinded. Then the rumbling sounds of the vehicles starting up rang out. The group of semi-blind people were all qualified old drivers. They were scared out of their wits when they heard the change in the sound of the engines. "The AI is out of control. Run!" It was unknown who shouted, but they didn't care about the consequences. They turned around and ran. They had no choice but to run. They were right in the middle of the passageway when the 4 heavy trucks drove out. A single mishap, and they would be crushed to death. The unmanned heavy trucks started up practically at the same time. Some were fast and some were slow. They utilized the space in the passageway to the greatest limit. They used the most efficient method to drive out of the garage in the shortest amount of time. They lined up in 2 rows and sped out. They didn't care about any obstacles they encountered during this process. The group of people ran towards the back of the passageway. Aside from 2 unlucky fellows who were scraped by the corners of the vehicles, they were more scared than hurt. But the sound of heavy footsteps could be heard at this time. Their dusky and blurred vision gradually became clear. They saw a person who shouldn't have appeared here. Jack. Mr. Jack. Jack ignored their existence. He carried a person under his ribs and ran with large strides. His speed was truly fast. He caught up to the 4 accelerating heavy trucks in the blink of an eye. He chose the one at the very front and jumped onto the roof of the truck while carrying the person. That kind of inhuman jumping ability made the group of people dumbfounded. F***ck off. Cragburst swept past like a tempest. He saw Jack's movements from afar and wanted to catch up. But when he tried to pass through the 2 heavy trucks behind him, the 2 unmanned trucks moved inwards at the same time. They wanted to squeeze him to death. Cragburst cursed loudly. He also displayed his inhuman jumping ability and jumped onto the roof of the 4-meter-tall truck. But before he could steady himself, the heavy truck under his feet came to a sudden stop. The powerful inertia threw him to the front of the truck. The other truck that had been driving side by side suddenly turned horizontally and rammed towards Cragburst. In the end, Cragburst didn't excel in agility. He was hit head-on in midair with a bang and was forcefully swept towards the side wall of the tunnel. The heavy truck chased after him and rammed. A rumble rang out as the truck smashed into the side wall of the tunnel. What the hell? Cragburst managed to roll in time and extricate himself from under the truck's wheels. The 2 heavy trucks had been turned into 2 heavy weapons by Jack. Even though they didn't deal any substantial damage to Cragburst's coarse skin and thick flesh, they seriously hindered Cragburst's pursuit. By the time Cragburst got up and started chasing, he could only see the taillights of the 2 heavy trucks ahead. Cragburst's face was ashen. He gritted his teeth and continued to run madly. But the 2 heavy trucks ahead had already driven out of the tunnel at this time. Looking at the headlights, one was driving left and one was driving right. Cragburst's scalp went numb. He didn't have the time to look at Jack's movements just now. God knows which truck Jack took Route 1 and ran away in? Scout. Just as the call came out from the psychic wave network, the sound of flapping wings could be heard above his head. Ink, who had run off to God knows where, streaked over his head to guide the route. Luonan used the Hexa-ear to transmit. It's the one on the right. It's heading out of the city. You need a means of transportation. Jack has the ability to control all information devices. You can only choose the non-intelligent model. F***ck. How can there be non-intelligent models nowadays? Bicycles? The motorcycle you drove over here is pretty good. There's one here too. Make a turn. Goods yard area. 70 meters to the right. Cragburst didn't hesitate at all. He madly sprinted all the way to the location Luonan spoke of, and sent the 2 gangsters flying. He snatched the motorcycle and shot out like an arrow, chasing with all his might. It was said that sharpening one's axe wouldn't delay the work of cutting firewood. Gangsters loved to modify high-powered motorcycles the most. Though they were electrically powered, they could casually reach speeds of 200 kilometers per hour on good roads. Cragburst still remembered the limitations of Luonan's spirit-attached crow. He growled, "Leave the rest to me." Ah! I'll F***ck Jack's 8 generations of ancestors. The motorcycle rumbled as it charged out of the tunnel. It drove onto the shabby road. The taillights of the heavy truck could still be seen at this time. The head-on strong winds let out a rumble. Cragburst used his powerful arm strength to ensure the stability of the front of the motorcycle. He directly turned the throttle to the bottom. But at this time, an omen suddenly sprouted in his mind. Luonan's warning cut in at the same time. Above. Fuck. Luonan cursed in a rarely seen manner. The dark red tail of flames cut over his head and connected with the road ahead. A fiercely expanding fireball appeared before Cragburst's eyes. The powerful shockwave and the terrifying raging flames instantly engulfed him. Chapter 127. Target A's vehicle destroyed. His vital signs fluctuated greatly. The wingless aircraft, painted black and without any obvious markings, flew past at a low altitude. Its electronic eyes locked onto the blazing area below. Switched to lock-on mode. Second attack confirmed. Beep! The warning signal was formed, and the wingless aircraft abruptly lifted up. But it was still a step too late. The roar sounded. Within the raging flames on the dilapidated road, a ball of flame light suddenly split out. Under the pressure of the powerful force, it condensed, like a fiery meteor, leaping into the sky. The wingless aircraft made an evasive maneuver, but it wasn't able to completely evade the attack. Flames exploded as well, and the alloy structure instantly distorted as it plummeted to the ground. Ah! Cragburst madly shouted as he charged out of the raging flames. His sturdy body was wrapped in a layer of fiery light. The clothes on his body had already been burned clean, and his hair and eyebrows had also been scorched by the high temperature. However, no matter how the flames burned, there was an invisible barrier between them and his skin. Because of this, his skin was roasted red by the high temperature, but not a single spark stuck to his body. Open it. Cragburst adopted a stance, and the muscles of his entire body shook like waves. Incorporeal waves of air burst forth in all directions. The layer of flame stuck to his body was forcefully blown away, scattering into sparks that filled the sky. Cragburst's naked body swept his gaze over the crashed aircraft in the distance. He let out another loud roar. The anger that he had been holding back along the way could finally be vented a little. At this time, Luo Nan's somewhat incoherent voice came from the hexaear. F***ck shit. Cragburst, I thought. You didn't die? Cragburst spat. Don't tell me that nickname is for nothing? Even if the rock cracked, I'll still be alive. Have you ever seen anyone survive a fuel air bomb? That's me. Also, Scout, you must attend the association's beginner's seminar. The warning words are too unstandardized. If it's a long-range attack, the basic elements such as the direction, nature, and landing point should be stated first. Luo Nan's warning came before he could finish babbling. Dodge quickly. Get off the roadbed. It was still a non-standard warning, but this time, he finally came up with some effective suggestions. Cragburst didn't say anything further. He rolled down the road. Half a second later, flames burst into the sky again. The powerful shockwave shattered most of the glass windows on both sides of the road. It was another wingless aircraft. This kind of small unmanned aircraft was used as a weapon platform. It had obviously learned its lesson from the previous one. Even when it was 1 kilometer away, it could still accurately lock onto the target's position with its radar and satellite positioning. With the range of Luo Nan's mental senses, Luo Nan was only able to detect and warn Xie after Xie's weapon had been fired. The pressure was enormous right now. Cragburst shrunk under the roadbed and protected his body from being engulfed by the flames. This was all he could do for the time being. He finally couldn't help but curse. Is this King gang? He should be a big arms dealer. Luo Nan spoke coldly. Isn't Quantum Corporation the world's top arms dealer? After the Deep Blue platform was developed, this was already the conclusion. Right, Quantum Corporation? Cragburst should have thought of this a long time ago. But the impression that Quantum Corporation was a top-notch high-tech corporation was too deep. It was really hard to connect them to the gangs of the recycling stratum. Even if they thought of collusion, they wouldn't have expected it to be to such an extent. Is this King war? He heavily smashed into the ground, unable to hold on any longer. He tumbled all the way away from the road, not daring to return to the cargo passageway. Instead, he charged towards the main building of the Dashang building. He charged into the building in one breath, and walked a few dozen meters in, before he could truly catch his breath. Right now, the gang's lair had been alarmed by the situation outside. Everyone stuck their heads out to look. Cragburst charged in furiously, instantly attracting everyone's gazes. It's that guy. Half an hour ago, Cragburst had engaged in a gunfight with the people here, when he was chasing after Jack. The group of gangsters had a vivid memory of this brawny man with skin of copper and bones of iron. The group of gangsters immediately drew their weapons and brandished their sticks. And then, there was no then. Crag burst, didn't even have time to make a move. Luonan had already knocked out the entire group. Even though the human-faced arachnid had degenerated into a wraith-sign state, knocking out these small fries at its current level was as easy as blowing off dust. In the end, all Crag burst did was find a relatively large person and strip off his clothes to cover his vital areas. The entire process didn't take more than 20 seconds, but Crag burst's expression was still ugly. We've been delayed for too long. Even if it's a heavy truck, it should be 10 kilometers away by now. What the hell is this guy thinking? Where does he want to take Ruiwen? Ruiwen's situation could be seen with a single glance. She had been implanted with a control device early on, which was why she didn't have the strength to fight back. This kind of situation would occasionally occur in other underground fighting arenas. It was mainly for the sake of safety, but this move of Jack's was clearly aimed at abducting someone. This was 2F** King Strange. Ruiwen just awakened her ability. He wants to sell an ability user for money? Luonan recalled the conversation between the contact person and Jack. The contact person had said that any information related to Ruiwen must be reported to Jack in time. Clearly, Ruiwen had a special position in the underground fighting arena. Was it because Jack? More accurately speaking, was it because the power behind Jack had discovered Ruiwen's potential early on? The wingless drone circled around the Deshang building. It constantly switched search methods, locked onto the target's position, and ensured that Ruiwen couldn't rush out of the building to pursue Jack. Yin Yongbua sat quietly behind his office desk, watching the live feed. A beep sounded from outside the door. Hu Yuli relied on his high level of authority to forcefully swipe the machine and push the door open to enter. He saw the image displayed on the holographic screen in front of Yin Yongbua, and his fury soared to the heavens. Assistant Yin, what the hell are you doing? It's as you can see, providing fire support. Yin Yongbua didn't show any respect to the Quantum Corporation's Xia City Area Executive Director. His butt didn't even leave his chair. Hu Yuli slammed the table heavily. This is Xia City. This is Metropolis. This isn't the Deep Blue World. Do you know how many calls come in when armed drones fly? The mayor's office, the security bureau, the social security bureau, the city defense army. Yin Yongbua raised his head. His expression was calm, but the veins at the corner of his dark red eyes pulsed slightly. That feeling made Hu Yuli suddenly choke. His voice, tone, and attitude immediately lowered quite a bit. My boy, I'm going to retire immediately after this matter with the R&D district. If you want to ascend, I'll give you my full support. If you want the Rainbow Fund and the Investment Society, I'll give it to you without a second thought, okay? But you can't turn around and roast me over the fire. Chapter 128. Research Mission. Research requires the use of armed platforms? Hu Yuli felt that this was incomprehensible. My boy, I know you came from the Deep Blue World. That's right. Things there are very straightforward. The Apocalypse Laboratory is a core organization. Everything revolves around the laboratory. But I'll still say the same thing. This is Xia City. The government and the military are the ones who make the rules. We are a company. We should use money and connections to solve problems. This is what we should do. It doesn't matter who makes the rules. The assessment department and the methods determine everything. Yin Yongbua leaned back in his chair and interlaced his fingers. You are responsible to the company's board of directors. You need to accomplish your revenue targets. I am responsible to the laboratory. I need to accomplish my deadlines. If you can't accomplish your goals, you step down and bow. But what if I can't accomplish my mission? I won't even have a place to stand. This is where the difference between us lies. Hu Yuli took a deep breath. My boy, we all know each other's difficulties. But weren't things going well before? Everything is progressing according to plan. The personnel and equipment are all ready. We just need to move them to gear. This is an excavation mission. Its priority is just below research. I've seen your full cooperation these past few days, Director Hu. Excavation. Research. In the end, Hu Yuli was a high-level member of Quantum Corporation. He had been confused by the overly common title of research mission. But now that he heard Yin Yongbwa emphasize it again, he suddenly understood. The research you speak of. Is it the Deep Blue Project or the Bloodline Project? Yin Yongbwa raised his eyes to look at him. What do you think? Hu Yuli knew that he was about to retire as a high-level executive. It would be best if he didn't get too involved. He immediately took a deep breath. Fine. I was reckless this time. But my boy, no matter what the mission is, no matter how high the priority, there is nothing wrong with paying attention to a few methods. Right now, the company is very passive in Xia City because of this matter with the R&D district. The pressure on me is great. If I don't reverse this situation, many missions will be disturbed, whether it's excavation or research. Don't you think so? Yin Yongbwa wasn't blindly arrogant. Seeing that Hu Yuli had completely admitted defeat, he stood up with a smile and had his secretary bring 2 cups of coffee. Director Hu, it is unfortunate that an accident occurred, but no one expected that the human-faced arachnid would rebel, just like no one expected that it would be targeted. The human-faced arachnid was Plan A. We were close to success when it was destroyed, but this was not the end. Here was Plan B. We have done very well up until now. But the problem is that the road to happiness is strewn with setbacks. The highest priority has appeared, and we have to prioritize. Fortunately, this should only be a temporary mission. As long as everything goes smoothly, we will only be nervous for 2 days at most. It won't affect the implementation of Plan B. I hope so. Hu Yuli didn't wait for the cup of coffee. He didn't even need to drink it. Right now, his heart was filled with bitterness. He immediately said his goodbyes. Yin Yongbwa walked him to the door. When Hu Yuli was about to open the door, he hesitated for a moment. In the end, he could not help but turn around and say, "Can you answer a question? Please go ahead." I am very clear about the importance of excavating the Stargate. If we can control the Deep Blue world, we will completely change the course of human history. However, on what basis did that research have to be prioritized over the Stargate? Is it because of its taboo? My instructor in the laboratory, Mr. Li Wei, once said, everything can be delegated to mortals. Gods only need to control life. Yin Yongbwa spread his hands. From his perspective, the research of life is the domain of gods. Humans and gods have different standpoints. Madman. Hu Yuli shot a cold glance at Yin Yongbwa. He said no more and left with large strides. In the lower levels of the Dashang building, Crag burst gradually calmed down as time went on. After muttering to himself for a moment, he suddenly proposed, "I'll contact the society." There are dozens to 100 people in the fighting arena. If he doesn't take Ruewen away, she will be targeted once she awakens her ability. The possibility of her being an ability user trafficker is very high. According to what I know, many underground powers have similar mechanisms to nurture venomous insects. They exhaust all methods to stimulate the potential of their targets, catalyze their awakening, and then sell them for money. Large companies and secret orders are all very good buyers. Cragburst said coldly. When it comes to this sort of thing, we can only see one and eliminate one. Right now, this is no longer a matter of investigating you. This matter will be handled by the society. Even if it's Quantum Corporation, if they can't give us an explanation, we'll beat the fuck up. But just as he made his decision, he smashed a fist into his palm. The most important thing is still tracking. Luo Nan was quite helpless as well. Actually, with the speed of his soul, he could lock onto Jack if he wholeheartedly focused on tracking him. But Cragburst had been ambushed and pinned down, delaying him for such a long time. He might be able to catch up to the heavy truck, but Jack knew of the existence of the soul body. Would he just obediently stay in the truck and drive all the way out of the city? Not to mention that Quantum Corporation had already directly made their move. After covering fire, it was time to provide support and move. Xia City had a population of 200 million. Hiding 2 people was far too easy. It would be great if Cat Eyes was here. With her psychic perception, as long as she made contact with Ruewen, Locking onto them from a distance of 300 to 500 kilometers is nothing difficult. All right, Scout. Your all-encompassing perception is so awesome. Do you know what psychic perception is? Oh right. Aren't you a psychic? Why don't you try drawing a picture? Luonan didn't respond. Cragburst also knew that this was just wishful thinking. He clenched his teeth and said, I'll contact the society first. If we can't catch him, we'll have to hand him over. In short, we can't let that bastard escape. I'm going to personally crush his skull. Cragburst raged as he contacted the society. Luonan thought for a bit, then his soul body bounced and returned to the fighting arena. It was a mess here. The spectators were all retreating. There were still more than 20 unlucky people who had fainted, or simply could not wake up. They also needed to be dealt with. Jack left in a huff, causing the other people in charge to be badly battered. Soon the fighting arena was empty. There weren't many figures left. The altar that the human-faced arachnid had built upon the negative emotions of the spectators had fallen into disarray. But from another perspective, Luonan was here. The framework that supported the altar still existed. The rules of the sacrificial ritual continued. The sacrificial process had yet to truly come to an end. Under the iron rule of winner takes all, as the final victor, Ruewen had yet to completely withdraw or clearly renounce her rightful rights. The human-faced arachnid had taken advantage of the great maw basilisk's disruption to divert the disaster to someone else. But all the spectators present were sacrificial offerings. They were targets to be harvested. There was still a connection between her and these sacrificial offerings. There was still a connection between her and the altar framework. Luonan could clearly sense this. Chapter 129. Perhaps he really could draw a picture. Cragburst's reminder reminded Luonan of his identity as a psychic. Though he was still muddle-headed about the principles involved, reality proved that he really did have talent in this area. Most importantly, Luonan had inspiration right now. This inspiration had existed ever since the start of the sacrificial ritual. The treacherous altar, the burning sea of clouds, the brilliant stars, the tempered sharpness, and of course, the empty and silent domain of death in the end. Lines, composition, light and shade. All sorts of elements had been pondered in his mind for a long time. Luonan believed that even if this matter didn't happen, he would certainly carve this scene down when he returned home, and observe it from time to time. At this very moment, a single thought was born, and the impulse to draw became exceptionally intense. However, from his several experiences drawing psychic diagrams, he knew that he needed to have a source and a direction before he put his pen to paper. He needed to add to the existing composition, but Luonan knew far too little about Ruewen's past. Oh, this was easy to do. Luonan's mental senses were released with full force in an instant. The badly battered person in charge of the fighting arena, the panic-stricken spectators in the passageway, and the gangsters who were maintaining order while whispering to each other. No matter where these people were, or what they were doing, all of them couldn't help but shiver at the same time. Ink, who had been with Cragburst this entire time, flapped its wings and flew back in the direction of the fighting arena, ignoring Cragburst's calls. Mr. Ma lay on the stretcher in a daze, his hand pressed against his chest. Even though he had already taken medicine and was on a ventilator, the palpitations and suffocation from a few minutes ago still followed him like a shadow. What in the world had happened? He was the director of a large biopharmaceutical company in Xia City. His net worth was in the hundreds of millions. People respectfully addressed him as Mr. Ma. Wealth and women were nothing more than decorations to him. His future was full of 60 to 70 years. What he needed was more vivid interest, more intense stimulation, and a higher level of accomplishment. What could be more interesting, more exciting, and more successful than dominating the lives of others? So Mr. Ma fell in love with the fighting arena. He fell in love with the smell of blood here. He invested in this place for the sake of changing the style of fighting to become more exciting and more exciting. Today, the fighting arena had asked him to borrow his top-notch collection, the aberrant Great Maw Basilisk. He agreed without hesitation. In fact, he had purchased this mutant in order to add new tricks to the arena at some point in the future. His wish had come true ahead of time. But just a few minutes ago, his most prideful collection, the great mob basilisk worth tens of millions, fell to the ground in front of him, crumbling and rotting. The destruction of the collection was not the end of the world. However, that form, the will of death that descended in that instant, the terrifying power that far exceeded the limits of his control, gave him a heavy blow in the chest. Who caused all this? Rue-1, the girl who struggled in the cage he had created. He remembered that 3 years ago, when she had just arrived at the arena, she was so skinny that she looked like she was only 6 or 7 years old. It was only under the stimulation of drugs that she had grown to her current height. She was a genius grandmaster of combat. Subtracting the time of training, she had become the king of the arena, charging for 100 victories in a short year. But no matter what kind of genius she was always grasped in the palm of his hand. Every time he saw Rue pretend to be calm, but from beginning to end she was in a desperate situation, Mr. Ma felt a sense of satisfaction arise spontaneously. Her fists were hard and fast, but no matter how fast or hard they could not break through the transparent protective wall surrounding them. This was what it meant to be a ruler. This was pleasure. But why was it completely different today? From beginning to end, not even a strand of his hair had been harmed. But there was an invisible ice-cold hand clutching his throat, pressing him down on the ugly corpse of the basilisk, letting him savor the taste of fear and death to his heart's content. Rue-1, that plunderer, the ominous crow. The exit is up ahead. The relieved voice of the medical personnel beside him rang out. The ambulance is already parked in the parking lot. Mr. Ma is first, and then, the sound of flapping wings rang out, practically flying over his head. The medical personnel cried out in alarm. That crow is so big. Mr. Ma's eyes snapped open just as the stretcher exited the tunnel. In the changing light, the black silhouette of the crow flipped over people's heads, projecting a demonic silhouette of light and shadow. The medical personnel instinctively waved his hand to drive it away, only to receive a black feather fluttering down. It was like the demonic eye of the netherworld cast a glance. Rue-1. Mr. Ma sat up all of a sudden, spurring his chi and blood to surge. The explosive sound of his heart became the rumbling sound of a funeral bell. He widened his eyes and fell backward. His final mournful scream was transmitted back, repeatedly refracting in the curved tunnel. Rue-1, Rue-1, Rue-1. The huge crow flapped its wings and swept past. In an extremely short period of time, not a single person made a sound or moved in the entire passageway. Fear gripped their throats, and like an ice-cold tide, it swallowed them up one by one. Rue-1, Rue-1. This name seemed to transform into a demonic incantation. From the outside to the inside, from him to me, it grew and spread from the bottom of my heart. Plunderer, the large crow, the flat-chested witch. Fragments of memories flipped endlessly, twisting together with emotions. They were truly like the sweeping wings of the crow before their eyes, painting a picture of deep foreboding and fear. The crow swept past the tunnel and crashed into the empty fighting arena. It spiraled in the air. In Luonan's eyes, the crow was piercing through a dark cloud of negative emotions. The outline of an altar was interwoven within the surging cloud layer. Several hundred blurry figures were running and shouting within. Compared to their earlier foolishness, they seemed to have a clearer definition of their own position. They had transformed from illusory rulers into actual pigs and sheep. Countless scenes of Rue-1's memories appeared and blended within the altar. The vast majority of them were fragmented and distorted. They combined to form a fuzzy image of Rue-1. Countless sides were pieced together, but it was far too biased. Luonan pondered. The Rue-1 he saw was different from these people. Admittedly, Rue-1 had contended against the human-faced arachnid and defeated it. Rue-1 had beheaded the great mob basilisk in one strike. She had left a deep impression on him. But the first impression Rue-1 gave him was that of a young and inexperienced child with a towel covering her head in the waiting room. She had used childish words to converse with Mr. Crow. She had sunk deep into the circle of her own logic. Perhaps her self-identity leaned more toward that of a crow than a person. But no matter what, she was the one and only victor on Luonan's altar. She had sacrificed everything and reaped everything. Luo Nan was the bearer of the altar's framework. He had the obligation to bestow blessings upon the victor. Ink let out a coarse squawk that was absolutely not pleasant to listen to. But this hoarse voice surged together with a call on the mental plane. It was suddenly thrown into the night sky of Xia City. The sole victor, Rue won. The dark clouds surged and churned. A bright and resplendent star rose beyond the heavens. Its sharp radiance swept through the clouds and mist. The outline of the altar's structure became unprecedentedly clear. It was just like the shape of Luo Nan's pyramid. Chapter 130. The star was Rue Wen's projection on the altar. It was also a projection in Luo Nan's heart. It wouldn't directly tell Luo Nan Rue Wen's location in the real world, but the connection and the corresponding information were unique. This understanding melded into Luo Nan's calls and blessings. It was like thunder and fire that soared to the heavens. It exploded amidst the dense black clouds, and the cries of thunder and the spreading psychic waves swept across the night sky of Xia City. It connected and contrasted with the millions upon millions of living beings. There was only one goal in the world that corresponded to it. This was Luo Nan's attempt in a flash of inspiration. It was like the stroke of a god when painting. He didn't know if he could get the result he wanted. All he could do now was wait. Scout, scout! Crag-burst shout rang out, pulling Luo Nan back to reality. I'm here. Where did you go? Here in the arena. I'll see if there are any clues about Raven in preparation for the psychic map. What do you think? Can you do it? It's hard to say. Right now, Luo Nan's lies really came out of his mouth as soon as he opened his mouth. But in a certain sense, this could not be considered a lie. He was indeed preparing to communicate with the touring spirit. It was just that he had already finished drawing it. Cragburst was a bit disappointed, but he quickly changed the subject. The secretary wants to talk to you. Is it convenient for you? Secretary? You mean Sister He? Of course it's convenient. How is it inconvenient? Luo Nan just felt baffled. He Wayne could have contacted him directly through the Hexa ear. Why did she need to ask Cragburst? Cragburst said, "Oh." Very soon a new call came in. "Hello, Mr. Luo. I'm He Wayne. The code name of the association is Secretary." A Sister He. Luo Nan didn't understand why an internal codename had suddenly jumped out. It was as if he wanted to recognize it all over again. It was very odd. Soon, He Wayne gave an explanation. The society has already received Cragburst's report and has decided to intervene in this matter. Since it was related to a social enterprise, to avoid trouble, the association added in confidentiality procedures. Those who participated in the operation were all referred to by their internal code names. The briefings before and after the operation were also handled in this manner. Due to the special nature of your situation, Friday night's briefing will be handled accordingly before Monday's announcement. Luo Nan suddenly felt very formal. It was as if he had entered a military department. Was the Ability User Society always like this? Very soon, Cragburst's rueful sigh explained everything. The customs have changed. It's like I've returned to the army. Yuan's communication continued. As for Mr. Luo's code name, I originally drafted one on your behalf. It's called Painter. Very good, very appropriate. But it's too close, and it's easy to make associations. I'm sorry, but I just learned a few things about you from Cragburst. With the circumstances you and your family are currently facing, it's not suitable for you to stand in the front. Maybe. Luo Nan thought of Yin Yongbo at this time. I just heard Cragburst call you Scout. This code name is rather vague, but it's rather appropriate. If you don't mind, can we use this internal code name for this operation? No problem. Luo Nan didn't mind this kind of empty reputation. He was more concerned about how to cooperate with the society and rescue Rue when as soon as possible. So Secretary, what do we do next? Follow-up reinforcements will be arriving soon. At the same time, the society will have the entire city under surveillance. Depending on the situation, they will decide whether or not to negotiate with Quantum Corporation. Then me and Crag burst. As for you, you don't have a clear mission at the moment. Because there's a matter that needs to be resolved as soon as possible. Ah. He Yuan's voice was tranquil. Mrs. Luo Shuqing sent you to Xia City's Renai Hospital 2 minutes ago. The current conclusion is that you've lost consciousness and are in a shallow coma. Huh. Crag burst nearly went insane from hearing this. Isn't Scout right here? You're talking about his main body? Luo Nan was speechless for a time. Only now did he remember how long it had been since his soul was in an out-of-body state. It had been at least 3 or 4 hours. He was still pretending to be asleep in the car before his out-of-body state. Even if he circled around the city, he should be home by now. Clearly, he had no way of getting off the car by himself. In a short 2 days, he couldn't be woken up again. And this time he really couldn't be woken up. It must be known that his aunt and uncle had just secretly done a DNA test for him. Under these circumstances, the two couldn't help but think too much. Mr. Luo, Crag burst says that you're attaching your soul to Crow's body. But I don't think so. He Wayne didn't call him by his code name, indicating that this matter had nothing to do with the operation. It looked like the matter of his out-of-body state couldn't be concealed any longer. Luo Nan was just about to come clean when He Wayne spoke. I've consulted old man Yu. Your situation is very likely to be a rather complicated soul attachment state. In other words, the vast majority of your consciousness, or perhaps it should be said that your soul has been projected through your ability to come to Crow's body. This is an extremely troublesome situation. It will cause continuous wear and tear to both you and the target of your soul attachment. If the separation isn't done in time, the consequences will be extremely serious. I've already informed Cragburst that you shouldn't go anywhere right now. Mr. Bai of the Society is rushing over right now. He's proficient in the dream-inducing technique and has deep attainments in the study of the soul. Let him diagnose you. As for the matter of the hospital, I'll take care of it. Hold on. Sister He. Right now, I'm... Luonan didn't know why old man Yu, the strongest psychic in the society, would make such an error in judgment. But right now, he clearly couldn't waste time on this matter. He was just about to explain when his consciousness suddenly turned sluggish. Do you hear a sound? Mr. Luo? Luonan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he concentrated his energy to listen attentively. He had an answer after a breath of time. He immediately said, Sister He, you help me out. Brother Octopus knows more about my situation. You can talk to him. I think I've discovered Ruewen right now. Where? Cragburst and He Wayne asked at the same time. Wait for me to confirm. Luo Nan's voice had yet to fall when a marvelous feeling came back from far away. It was like a rock falling in free fall. Under the marvelous effect of gravity, Luo Nan's mind was completely drawn over. Boom! The rock fell into the water, creating clear ripples. The surrounding environment suddenly turned silent. Only Luo Nan, this little rock, sank all the way down. His consciousness rubbed against the body of water. The subtle sounds soon turned muddy within the weak background noise. In the end, everything returned to tranquility. Luonan wasn't confused by such a marvelous perception. The pulling effect of the format pyramid and the stars told him that his consciousness had indeed locked onto Ruewen's position. He was trying to make contact with Ruewen's consciousness. As for why it was such a deep body of water, actually there was a reference in front. Jack's mental defense was like this. However, Jack's mental defense should have been modified. It was stable, firm, and rigid. It was like a pool of half-frozen, stagnant water. Chapter 131. Luonan felt a kind of rhythm within the deep water. He carefully discerned it. It was the quiet and drawn-out breathing of deep sleep. The water appeared to be undisturbed, but it constantly breathed out the old and breathed in the new. It had its own rhythm. Ruewen's body and consciousness were all highly unified within this rhythm. Of course, this wasn't a monotonous fluctuation of strength and weakness. Instead, it was the joint effect of breathing, blood flow, internal organ movements, and other components. It was like a harmonious rhythm played by a symphony orchestra. Even the soul was fused within. It was nearly perfect. Luo Nan confirmed that if he were to use the siege hammer to attack Rui 1, it would be impossible for him to ignore the defenses of the fleshly body and directly attack the soul. This was because Rui 1 had used this method to perfectly fuse her fleshly body and soul together. The inside and the outside were harmonious, becoming one. An attack on the pure mental plane would be dispersed to the greatest degree. This was the situation that Jack had displayed back then. Sure enough, comparison was a good way to see through the root of things. Luo Nan's siege hammer was ineffective when he fought Jack back then. He couldn't understand the theory behind it, so he could only attribute it to the altered human. Now his train of thought was much clearer. Of course, Jack was able to accomplish this because of the altered human factor. And Rui 1 was able to achieve this by relying on the simplest of breathing. Perhaps this was what a true genius was like. The water slowly lit up when Luo Nan understood this point. His consciousness illuminated this place, and he truly saw Rui 1. He performed a shallow scan on the girl. Rui 1 was still unconscious. He couldn't see any other changes. Luo Nan tried to wake her up, but he failed. The reason was very simple. Rui 1 was currently in a kind of muddled state. It was very hard to distinguish the boundary between her body and her consciousness. Luo Nan's contact on the pure mental plane was clearly too weak. He was unable to form sufficient stimulation. But there was a very crucial point here. Rui 1's muddled state was the dual coordinated effect of her body and consciousness. These two fulcrums were indispensable. Then came the problem. Rui 1 was currently unconscious. It was reasonable to say that it was impossible for her to truly achieve muddled state. But as long as she reached this state, she wouldn't be unconscious. She would certainly achieve absolute control over her body and mind. A paradox seemed to form between the two. This was the main culprit that caused Rui 1 to be unconscious until now. Actually, Luo Nan had already discovered the reason for this earlier. Rui 1's current state was nearly perfect. There were still a few flaws. The problem didn't lie with Rui 1 herself, but with two external sources of interference. One in the cranial cavity, and one in the thoracic cavity. These must have been Jack's early implants. There was an electric discharge device in her chest that was attached to her spine. It was similar to an electric shock weapon, and its purpose should be to destroy Rui 1's mobility in the shortest amount of time possible. However, according to Luo Nan's scans, this toy seemed to have lost its effectiveness. Perhaps it was destroyed by the recoil of Rui 1's powerful ability. The real source of interference was still the one in the cranial cavity. That thing was constantly emitting interference pulses. They weren't particularly strong, but they were able to destroy Rui 1's harmonious state, causing Rui 1's mental and physical fusion to always fall a little short. It was precisely this point that had caused Rui 1 to remain unconscious until now. That would be troublesome. Luo Nan wasn't a neurosurgeon expert. Even if he was, he wouldn't be able to perform a craniotomy with the bit of consciousness he projected. As expected, they still had to rely on external help to rescue them. Luo Nan helplessly gave up on the idea of awakening Rui 1. He settled for the next best thing. He used the projected consciousness as a fulcrum, or a signal relay tower, to strengthen his connection with his soul body. Luo Nan's soul body was still at the Deshang building right now. The radius of his all-encompassing senses was still only around 500 meters. The surroundings were a vast, fuzzy and dark area. However, when this signal tower was erected, a ball of light lit up in the distant darkness. The map of that small area was illuminated. The range of Luo Nan's mental senses didn't expand, but they were projected to a fixed point. Luo Nan looked down from a high vantage point, like opening a crude satellite image. The resolution was terrible, but it was gradually improving. And there was one point that no satellite image could compare to. This was a miniature real-time panoramic map. Luo Nan was like a ghost floating in the sky right now. To put it nicely, he was a god. Luo Nan saw Jack in the next moment. Jack clearly didn't sense Luo Nan's existence. This was because Luo Nan was relying on the signal tower built on Rui 1's body to exert his power. He was hidden within Rui 1's aura, so there would be some interference. However, Luo Nan didn't pay special attention to him. He didn't want to make this crafty fellow vigilant. Luonan mainly looked at the surrounding environment. Sure enough, Jack jumped out of the car midway. He should be in an apartment right now, standing in the living room deep in thought. Ruewen was sitting on a sofa within his reach. The location of the apartment was unknown. Luonan didn't know whether or not it belonged to Jack. But when he thought about it, Xia City, an intelligent city covered by the Internet of Things, was practically defenseless to Jack with the dynamo core. Luonan wanted to determine where he was, but it wasn't easy. The small map that had just been opened had a limited range. It wasn't even able to cover the entire apartment. The center was completely shrouded in the fog of war. The only relatively clear information was the direction and distance. He had to compare it with the map of Xia City to make an estimate. Luonan compared the map on the psychic wave network, while trying to make adjustments between the range and precision of his senses. He wanted to find a relatively ideal middle point. A call suddenly came in from Jack's side while he was tossing and turning. Jack was standing in the apartment's living room deep in thought right now. He laughed coldly when his wristband vibrated. He snapped his fingers, and the holographic screen in the living room lit up. A figure that gave Luonan a deep impression appeared clearly. "Hey Jack. How does it feel to be the center of the world?" Yin Yongbo raised the cup of coffee in his hand to greet Jack from afar. Jack responded coldly. "It's not great. You've gone from a banker to a gambler, and you've put your entire fortune on the line. Even if you have a blackjack in your hand, it's still no good? If you have the time to joke around, why don't you tell me the route of escape? Actually, when I picked up, I thought you would say that there's already a car parked downstairs." It could be seen that the relationship between Jack and Yin Yongbo was colder than usual. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.